The main character, an independent manga artist, lived in Tokyo, creating art and animations for popular games, which brought him a stable income, but his life became more and more monotonous and tedious. He was tired of living in a big city, where people changed endlessly, and he remained in his own closed reality. When the network of fast trains finally reached his home village, it was a sign for him. He made the decision to move there and start a new life, away from the bustling Tokyo. There, in the village, a new reality, simple and quiet, was waiting for him. The protagonist had always dreamed of a life where he could concentrate on what he really liked, work on his vegetable garden, and enjoy silence and solitude. He was sure that this life, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, would bring him long-awaited peace and harmony. But even in this new, quiet world, there was something he could not predict. And so, one day, he found himself in the middle of the forest, not realizing how he had gotten here. He looked around, trying to realize what was going on, and quickly realized that he had no memory of how he got here. He remembered exactly his name, his age, his place of residence, but everything else was vague and incomprehensible. He had been gathering herbs in the mountains, but suddenly he was in a completely different place. His body was intact, however, and he was still alive, which was already a comforting thought. The forest he found himself in was foreign and unfamiliar. The terrain, which seemed flat rather than mountainous, contradicted his memories. The only thing left to do was to act, lest he fall victim to this mysterious situation. He began to walk, slowly making his way through the lifeless forest, feeling the loneliness begin to weigh on his mind. He found himself thinking that all that was missing was an encounter with a bear to make things completely hopeless. His throat was dry, and as he checked his pockets, he realized that he had nothing that could help him survive in this strange place. He realized that when he got hungry, he would have no food, no water, no nothing at all. In the distance, among the trees, he noticed strange mushrooms, but they were unfamiliar to him. He didn't even know if he could eat them. Everything around him seemed alien and hostile, and as he looked around, he realized that at this rate he might well become the next victim of this place. Things were hopeless, and his thoughts were flitting from one terrifying thought to another. He needed to get out of this forest, to find at least some settlement, at least a single living person. Suddenly, his gaze came upon a strange sight, a guard lying by one of the trees. But it wasn't a living man, it was his dead body. He couldn't understand what had happened, and as he stepped closer, he whispered his regret. He was in a desperate situation and realized that he needed to find some resources to survive. He carefully searched the guard's bag and found a dagger and a ring. It wasn't much, but the weapons could be useful. Though the biggest problem, food, remained unsolved. But the strangeness didn't end there. Glancing over the dead man's armor, he couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. It was real metal armor, with obvious signs of damage and subsequent repairs. He couldn't quite explain to himself what was going on, or if it was a trap. He wondered if someone was trying to hunt him. However, he was just an unemployed artist, a middle-aged man from the countryside, and why would anyone want someone like him? But even if it was some kind of scam, he had nothing but what he could find here and now. His thoughts began to get lost in speculation that perhaps he was in another world. As he pondered this, he decided to test his hunch. Humorously, rather, even, for the sake of experimentation, he opened the status, hoping to see a familiar panel. And it did indeed appear. He saw his name Kenichi, age 38, and other strange features that made no sense to him. Among them, he noticed the word Shangri-La, a word he wasn't familiar with. He only knew that it was probably an online store he had once worked with. He was dumbfounded that this status actually worked, and with some excitement, he clicked on the strange word. When he got to the home page, He realized that it was the same Shangri-La, the online store he had visited so often. The homepage opened up a world in which he could seemingly find everything imaginable. It was a profiled online store, offering absolutely everything from books and food to clothing, toys, as well as used and new cars, trucks, and even heavy industry equipment. Kenichi was dumbfounded. It felt like cheating, as if he was in a game with unlimited possibilities in which he had been granted such an amazing skill. His gaze then caught on a button labeled inventory, and once he realized that it was indeed an inventory that you could put things in, he clicked it curiously. When the inventory panel opened, he put his dagger to it, and to his surprise, the dagger instantly disappeared as if it had been pulled inside. He was dumbfounded, but when he opened the menu, he saw that his inventory now contained a rusty sword. It was so strange that he didn't know how to react to it. Summoning all his courage, he clicked on the item to get it back. And lo and behold, the dagger returned to his hand, as if he had just taken it from his inventory. Kenichi couldn't believe how comfortable it was. That feeling of absolute freedom in controlling things was overwhelming. He then decided to test the user's function, and put the sword to the panel again. Now the sword disappeared as if it had been removed, and ended up in this trash folder, so to speak. Kenichi was surprised that this system worked so smoothly, and a new button appeared on the screen, with the image of a spiral. Without hesitation, he decided to press it, not knowing exactly what it did. At the same moment, the panel lit up, and a notification popped up asking if he wanted to remove items from his inventory. He realized that it was all like a system for deleting objects, like on a computer. He could probably keep things in his inventory for a while before they disappeared automatically. Now he had an inventory and a trash can, and Kenichi wondered how many items he could store in this space. It all seemed impossible, but he seemed to be forced to take that as a given. He began to ponder what kind of power this was, and if there was some sort of trick lurking behind it. After all, if he just accepted it as the norm, wouldn't someone demand payment for such a convenient system? But as he looked at the dead man again, he realized that if he was afraid to use his new powers, his fate would be the same as that guard's. He realized that he shouldn't worry too much, but rather use his power while he had the chance. After thinking about it, he opened the online store again, and after selecting a pack of secret buns and 3 packs of milk, he added the items to his cart. The price amounted to 2,500 yen. Kenichi, hoping that his plan would work, clicked the purchase button. Immediately, however, a notification of insufficient funds in his account appeared. He was puzzled. Did he really have no money? But he soon realized that it made sense. After all, he had started without a penny in his pocket. But he didn't know what he should do next. He found the refill button and decided to try it out. Refill offered him to add money, but he didn't have any. The whole situation became absurd and his thoughts were confused with hunger. Then, back in his inventory, Kenichi once again directed his attention to the rusty sword that he had only thoughtlessly stashed in his luggage before. He thought for a moment before deciding whether to sell it or keep it. Clicking on the item, he soon saw a notice pop up in front of him, asking if he really wanted to sell the object. It was a surprise to him. After all, there were many strange things in this new world he was in, and being able to sell items in his inventory seemed something completely absurd. The notification offered him 100,000 yen for a rusty sword. The amount was not a small sum, and to Kenichi it seemed something incredible. The sword, although it looked like rusty iron, was very valuable. The metal was not ordinary, but inlaid with rubies, which added to its value. Without hesitation, he pressed the sell button. The staggering sum immediately added to his balance, and he felt the load lifted off his shoulders a little. Now he knew that if it worked the way he thought it would, his food problems could be solved. After the replenishment was successful, Kenichi opened the store again. He figured it was time to eat before he thought about further plans. Instantly, the merchandise appeared right in front of him like magic. He stood up and settled himself on the ground, feeling the hunger slowly fade away and comfort return once more. As he ate, however, his gaze fell once more upon the body of a dead man, a guard who lay a few meters away from him, left here lifeless. After a while, feeling that he should give credit, he returned to the store, opened the inventory again, and purchased a shovel for 2,000 yen. When it appeared in front of him, he didn't hesitate. With a heavy heart, Kenichi set to work and buried the body of the guard, hiding it from sight and from his conscience. Having done this, he sat down on the grave with a deep sense of respect and humility, as if bidding farewell to the man whose death he saw before him. He asked the Buddha to grant this deceased person peace. There was gratitude in his heart, for it was because of this guardian that he was alive. He realized that he could not have survived in this strange world if he had not found the weapon and taken the chance he had been given. Upon reflection, Kenichi realized that now that he had access to the online store, he should seriously prepare himself for his future life in this world. He needed to take care of more practical things. He opened the store, and after carefully considering his purchases, he chose water, a few compact gas canisters, a portable gas stove, and a pot with a lid. All of this was necessary to provide food and water for himself in the future. Once he had all the goods in his hands, Kenichi set up a small kitchen right on the ground, turning the stove around. He cooked instant ramen, adding some sauce to it, and bought some chopsticks so that he could not only get full, but also feel like he was in the normal world. He enjoyed the taste of modernity, realizing that at least for a while his problems with food and basic needs were solved. The taste of curry, as it was, proved to be unrivaled, even in another world. However, at some point Kenichi came to an unpleasant realization: food and money couldn't last forever. He realized that, sooner or later, he would need to find a settlement where he could work and earn money. After that, he could use Shangri-La again, buy the things he needed and sell them for a profit, but this plan was only a theory. He didn't know if it would work in a world like this, but there was no other option. Realizing that it was time to look for a way out of the forest, Kenichi packed his things and began to prepare for the journey. He hadn't even taken a few steps before he felt the ground beneath him shake. Suddenly, a pack of wolves appeared around him. The smell of food had attracted these wild animals, and now they were ready to attack. Panic clutched his chest, but Kenichi quickly opened the store and went straight to the weapons section. A bow appeared on the screen, but he had never used it before. He didn't know how to operate it, so he decided to see what else the store would offer. Finally, his gaze came across what he needed. Whole boxes of fireworks appeared next to Kenichi as if by magic. Remembering how street dogs get scared by the loud sounds of fireworks, he instantly realized that this could be his salvation. He bought a 12-pack of Corsair pyrotechnic devices, some of the brightest and noisiest. Wasting no time, Kenichi grabbed the boxes and hurriedly brought them to his stove. Instantly, a bright flash illuminated the night darkness, accompanied by a deafening pop. Not letting the moment pass, Kenichi pulled out his slingshot. He was ready to use it to continue his attack. He deftly drew the rubber band, took aim, and fired a rock at one of the wolves that was trying to come back and pounce again. The stone hit the target, and the animal squealed and jumped aside, even more startled by the deafening explosions. He kept firing, not giving the wolves a chance. The slingshot flew from his fingers, sending rocks with terrific force, and each rock hit its target, causing the wolves to panic and scatter even faster. Kenichi sat on the ground, watching the wolves finally disappear into the dark depths of the forest. He realized that the danger hadn't gone away, the wolves might come back, and he needed to find a safe place before facing them again. He stood up, surveying his surroundings, and noticed that the forest was becoming less and less dense. He walked forward, and finally saw that the edge of the forest was near. But even when he got out of the forest, his path did not get any easier. A wide, almost endless meadow spread out ahead, and Kenichi continued on through the tall grass. He contemplated his next move. Exiting the forest was important, but he needed to scout out the surroundings. Realizing that his funds weren't infinite, he decided to buy a few things for scouting. He bought a ladder and a telescope from the store, a bit expensive, but there was no other option. He set up the ladder and, bringing the telescope up to his eyes, he surveyed his surroundings. After a few minutes, he spotted a city in the distance, barely visible in the fog of the horizon. He could clearly distinguish the movement of people in the streets, and he also saw a road leading directly to this city. This was a chance. Walking a little further, he would come right out onto the road that would lead him to the town. But looking at his balance, Kenichi realized that he had already spent almost half of his money. That was unsettling. He wondered if he should buy some spices, since 100 grams of spices cost 400 yen. Perhaps he could make a good profit by selling them in town for silver or gold. He found the inventory. Everything was like an RPG, which once again made him feel like he was in another world. Before he could finish his musings, a wagon drove by him, and the guy driving the horse turned around and asked if he was a traveler and headed to Dalia. Kenichi was dumbfounded to hear the guy speak in a language he understood. He nodded gratefully and admitted that he didn't have any money right now. However, the guy, noticing his situation, calmly stated that the road to Dalia wasn't that far away, and since Kenichi was in a difficult situation, he wouldn't charge him. The guy introduced himself as Fu and explained that he was a merchant. Kenichi introduced himself as well, and Fu, chuckling, said that his name was a bit strange. He then asked Kenichi if he too had left his father's house and had come to the city to trade. Kenichi nodded and said that was what he had come for. He decided to go with that version, since although he wasn't an expert in trading, he had some experience in farming. Fu, a little surprised, asked if Kenichi had come to trade. Why was he empty-handed? He then clarified if he had an inventory skill. This was a surprise to Kenichi. He realized that the inhabitants of this world knew about the inventory system. Interested, he asked Fu if he knew what it was. Fu replied that he was seeing someone with this skill for the first time and wondered why Kenichi hadn't become a merchant yet, as it was an incredible advantage. Kenichi, upon hearing the question about his occupation, replied that he was still working as a farmer. It was a lie, of course, but he realized that such a version would be easier to accept. While they were moving, Kenichi decided to seize the moment and ask Fu about local affairs. That way he learned many interesting details about how business was conducted in this new world. Once in Dalia, Kenichi realized that in order to sell something, he had to register with the merchant guild, and the registration fee was 1 silver coin. This struck him as a bit odd, as he still didn't know how it related to yen, but he was willing to figure it out. After Kenichi and Fu got down from the wagon and into Dalia, Kenichi felt slightly relieved. He thanked Fu for his help, knowing that although his journey was just beginning, it was an important step. Fu pointed in the direction of the inn and guild, and after a brief thank you, Kenichi called out to him, stating that he was a good guy. In gratitude, he handed him a pouch. Fu, upon opening the sack, was dumbfounded. The spices he saw were obviously something valuable. He said in surprise that Kenichi must be joking if he was willing to give away such a luxurious item. Kenichi refused to give the money, but Fu insisted. He explained that merchants like cheap goods, but never take something for nothing. He asked if Kenichi knew why that was so. Kenichi replied that nothing was more expensive than what he got for free. Few nodded approvingly. He placed 2 silver and 6 bronze coins in Kenichi's palm, adding that if he didn't take the money, he wouldn't take anything either. This was about market value. These coins gave Kenichi his first insight into the financial system of this world. He understood the exchange rate of gold and silver, for silver coins equaled 1 gold coin. This knowledge became an important reference point, as he had many trade deals ahead of him. But despite his victory in a minor transaction, Kenichi learned of more disturbing rumors. They had to do with the coalition monopoly that controlled the spice market. Problems with that looked like they would start soon enough, but before facing them, he needed to strengthen his position. Upon arriving at the hotel, Kenichi immediately felt that he had come to the right place. Opening the door, he saw that the atmosphere in the room was quite cozy, and the girl behind the counter said hello in a friendly manner. She asked if he needed a room or if he wanted to have lunch. The girl explained that a room with food cost 1 silver coin, and without food, 3 bronze coins. Kenichi chose a room, and after paying in advance, asked if the girl was the daughter of the innkeeper, to which she replied that she just worked here. The girl, noticing his uncertainty, asked if he had come in search of a supplier or was looking for a part-time job. Kenichi told her that he had come to become a vendor. This piqued her interest, and she decided to clarify if he could read, write, and count. He wondered how he could have forgotten such important things. The girl, grinning, remarked that merchants had to be able to read and write if they wanted to register with the merchant guild. Kenichi could read and write, but in a different language, which put him in a bit of a difficult position. Then the girl offered him a logic problem. If he has 4 sacks with 12 apples in each of them, how many apples will be in all those sacks? Kenichi answered without hesitation that 48 apples. The girl grinned and stated that this was very cool, and that he could actually read and count. She then asked his name, and Kenichi introduced himself. She also introduced herself as Azalea and signed his paper. Kenichi then decided to take the opportunity and asked Azalea for a favor, to teach him how to read and write. Azalea was surprised, but she listened carefully to his offer. Kenichi explained that he could give her some exotic goodies in return. This offer interested the girl, and she asked if they would be sweet. Kenichi bought a wooden box of fruit sacks for her, and when she tasted them, Azalea declared that they were very sweet and delicious. She added that eating these sweets made her feel like a true noblewoman. Kenichi, upon hearing this, inquired if nobility existed in this world. Azalea nodded and explained that nobility existed, but it was best not to mess with them because their influence could bring trouble. She also explained that if he was caught with such sweets, they would be taken away immediately. Kenichi, hearing this, thought for a moment, because this could be a serious problem. When he asked Azalea again if she would teach him anyway, she agreed. Kenichi also picked up on the fact that the paper was probably expensive and offered his own. When the girl stated that she was just about to charge him for the paper, Kenichi realized that he should remain vigilant in every move. He cautiously suggested that she use her own paper instead, hoping it would help avoid unnecessary expense. Azalea didn't hesitate to begin writing, and Kenichi watched her pen movement with interest. The language she was writing in was unexpectedly familiar. It was similar to Ramaji, only slightly different, which made him feel confident. The numbers written in the decimal system resembled Arabic numerals, and it made it easier to memorize. None of this caused him any difficulty, and he realized that he would be able to get used to the local written language faster than he had expected. Sometime later, after completing her work, Azalea collapsed on her bed, brooding, and then stated that she had originally thought Kenichi couldn't read or write. He, in turn, calmly explained that the language was very similar to his native tongue. Azalea, appreciating his answer, smiled and said that he would have no problem with the guild registration then. Looking at the girl, Kenichi in turn noticed that she was quite literate herself and, by the looks of it, could be an excellent merchant. Azalea looked at him in surprise and asked if he knew what the most important thing in business was. Kenichi replied without hesitation that it was resupply, to which Azalea nodded in approval. However, she immediately added that she was completely unaware of where to buy food, lamps, and other necessities, for example. Kenichi smiled, realizing that they still had a long way to go to figure out the ins and outs of the local market. At that moment, Azalea suddenly hugged him and said that she thought there would be no problem in his case, and that perhaps she could become his mistress. Kenichi, laughing, replied that with an old man like him, she could forget about it, for he was old enough to be her father. Azalea, without losing her temper, added that she had no father. At that moment, Kenichi, embarrassed, immediately apologized, but Azalea assured him that it was okay and that she knew he was a good man. A little later, Kenichi, feeling a surge of inspiration, took out a piece of paper and asked Azalea to sit down for exactly 1 second. She surprisingly complied with his request, not realizing what he was up to. After a moment, he held out to her the drawing he had just had time to sketch. Azalea, looking at it, was delighted. She said with admiration that Kenichi drew like real aristocrats. It was a surprise to her, for she didn't expect to see such talents in him. Azalea sat on the bed, scrutinizing the drawing and apparently losing herself a bit in the process. She was smiling, but suddenly, for some reason, she started pulling off her t-shirt. Kenichi, noticing this from the side, immediately shouted at her, asking what she was doing. Azalea, taking her time, smiling, replied that he had treated her to expensive sweets and painted her portrait. She asked that isn't it fair that only she gets everything. Kenichi was dumbfounded, his thoughts and feelings confused, and he began to wonder if everything was normal in this new world he found himself in, and if such things could be done right after being teleported to a completely unfamiliar reality. Kenichi, still in thought, imagined how he would trade in the marketplace, including the opportunities that would come with joining the merchant guild. However, his thoughts kept returning to questions of how appropriate it was to be doing such things, almost immediately after he found himself in this new world. As he sat next to Azalea, he asked her what she was going to do. She replied that he had given her many things of value. Kenichi didn't immediately understand what she meant, for in his eyes, that couldn't be an excuse for promiscuous behavior. But nevertheless, things had already happened. After a while, Kenichi was banging his head against the wall and was tormented by the thought of what he had done to this young girl. While she enjoyed her meal, he watched her reaction. She tasted his prepared dish and was surprised to notice that it was very crispy and the milk tasted amazing. She immediately stated that maybe that would be something that people would buy too. His mind immediately wondered how he would be able to justify the high price for simple foods like granola and milk in this world. Sure, sugar and fruit added sweetness, but it still couldn't cost much. He didn't want to mess with aristocrats, but Azalea added that the dish was indeed very tasty. Watching Azalea, Kenichi noticed how she looked just like an 18-year-old girl while enjoying her food. Her mannerisms and naivete made him wonder about her age, but it also reminded him how easy it was to get lost in one's own thoughts when one wasn't paying attention to details. Suddenly, he remembered that he had forgotten about paying for the night's lodging. He opened his status and found that the panel was only visible to him, which in turn left him with a new question as to whether Azalea could see his status panel. Azalea noticed his actions and looked at him and asked if he was talking about paying for a night's lodging. Kenichi nodded in response and asked her about the local coins. As he weighed everything, He wondered how these coins could relate to the money used in his past world. However, when he counted everything from memory, he realized that one night would cost him 3,000 yen, the equivalent of a significant amount, and that hit his wallet hard. Walking outside, Kenichi thought about his financial situation. Remembering how he had spent the money yesterday, he realized that it could run out quickly. He needed to find a job, and urgently, or he was in real trouble. He decided to try and join the Merchants Guild, the only place that could help him get his life together in this new world. When he entered the premises, he saw a lot of people. They argued, negotiated debts, and offered their services. Some seemed to be asking to borrow money, others refused, but overall the atmosphere was filled with noise and activity. Kenichi made his way through the crowd and approached a counter where a girl stood behind it. She was young and apparently well informed, because she immediately asked what he was inquiring about. Kenichi, a bit confused but determined, stated that he would like to join the guild. The girl nodded, expressing understanding, and handed him a piece of paper to fill out. When asked about joining, she replied that the cost of registration was 1 silver coin. That was essentially the equivalent of 50,000 yen. For Kenichi, it was a blow to his wallet. He felt his heart squeeze. Such an amount of money was unaffordable for him. He dared to ask if he could pay in installments, and the girl, to his relief, nodded, offering to pay in 10 installments. This, though painful, was much easier on his finances. Relieved, he took the paper and began to read it. A slight smile appeared on his face. Filling out the application was not as difficult as he had anticipated. This world didn't know how to type yet, and everything had to be written by hand. He was asked for his name, age, place of birth, and other details. He didn't hesitate long to indicate that he had been born in Dalia and didn't know any other place. On the next page was a test consisting of simple arithmetic examples, addition and multiplication. Kenichi was a little surprised that this was the entire test. After quickly completing the tasks, he handed the paper back to the girl. She set the papers aside and asked him to wait a bit. Kenichi waited patiently. After a while, the girl returned and thanked him for his patience. In her hand she held a stone, which she handed to Kenichi. She informed him that it was his confirmation of joining the guild, and warned him that he should wear the stone prominently while working as a merchant. The registration was completed, and Kenichi was relieved. He could now trade without any restrictions. However, despite this success, he still didn't know what to do next. Suddenly, out of the blue, he made a request to the girl. He asked where the local market was located. It was important to see what was being sold and how commerce worked in this world. The girl showed him the way, and Kenichi, deciding not to waste any time, headed there. At the market, he noticed that while there was a variety of goods, there were no fish that couldn't be stored here. There were fresh fruits, vegetables, cold weapons, gems, and other goods everywhere. It all lay side by side, in disorder, and Kenichi sensed that this was a place full of life and business. Kenichi slowly strolled through the market, studying the assortment of goods. Merchants held their talks, displaying goods with a variety of features and prices. One of them proudly displayed a canvas, claiming that even the stains on it gave it uniqueness and originality. The price was 1 copper coin, which equaled 1,000 yen. The seller was confident that his item had a special value despite its old appearance. Not far away from him stood another girl showing plates. She claimed that food served on such plates turned a common man into a nobleman. A simple plate without a pattern cost 1 silver coin, 5,000 yen, and one with a pattern was twice as expensive. Kenichi was surprised at how high such simple things were valued, but still continued to look around the market. Between the stalls was a young guy who was confidently offering knives, saying that you could cut almost anything with such a knife. The price was 1 silver coin, which was 50,000 yen. Kenichi thought about it. The market was saturated with goods, but most of the sellers seemed to work for ordinary people who couldn't afford expensive items. Suddenly, his thoughts were interrupted by a girl. She was showing baskets of fruit. She announced that these fruits of 3 colors, yellow, green, and red, cost 1 copper coin for a slide of 10 pieces. Kenichi, interested in the variety, asked to wrap 3 of each color. The girl agreed and handed him a bag of fruit. After handing over the money, Kenichi didn't have time to properly understand their names. He looked in the inventory and found that the fruits were listed under strange names, like Yablos for green and Yablos for yellow. He smiled, but still wasn't sure if the names were correct. In the evening, back at the inn, Kenichi approached Azalea with a red fruit in his hand. She recognized it immediately and explained that it was eublokra. Her reaction was one of complete confidence. She thanked him and stated that the fruit was indeed very sweet and delicious. Kenichi, smiling, watched her enjoy it, but his attention was drawn to the number of people in the inn. Azalea went on about how expensive the fruit was, but Kenichi couldn't help but wonder if this was really the eublokra she was talking about. When the fruit talk was over, Kenichi thought about his future. He still didn't know what he was going to do next, but he decided to take an important step. He showed Azalea the stone he was given when he registered with the guild, and she exclaimed happily with happiness. People around him noticed her good mood, and Kenichi felt that joining the guild was an important step in his new life. After a brief exchange of words, he returned to his room, where he bought a rope on which he hung this symbolic stone. He thought that perhaps this was not only the beginning of his journey as a merchant, but also a chance for a normal, measured life in this world. His next thoughts were about the market and how important it would be to make a profit. Kenichi decided to invest 3,000 yen to buy goods to sell and try to earn 10,000 yen in the future. The main thing for him was not to make a huge amount of money, but to have enough money to shop at Shangri-La. He decided that he would move carefully, taking his time. At this point, he hung the rope with the stone around his neck and thought about the fact that there was room for him in this new world and a chance for a measured life. He was determined, but at the same time felt that there was still much to understand and overcome. The next morning, he got down to business. Just as Kenichi was about to begin his business, Azalea burst into the room. With curiosity and genuine interest, she asked what all the commotion was about and what he was doing here. Kenichi, with a slight laugh, replied that he was building a trade counter. Azalea was dumbfounded, as it turned out that he was not only a merchant, but he could also work with tools and turn his plan into reality in a matter of minutes. Kenichi, a little embarrassed by her surprise, confirmed this. There were indeed many unusual tools in this world, and it helped him to assemble the counter. Kenichi felt relieved that he had managed his money properly, splitting the registration fee and the purchase of materials into the tools he needed. He realized that if it wasn't for this strategy, his options would have been limited. As he packed up and began to work, Kenichi added a saw, a screwdriver, and boards. Once finished, he looked over his creation with pride. The counter stood in the corner of the room, now ready for trading. He noted with satisfaction that the room had not been damaged, and he would be sure to clean up the sawdust that remained after the work. Azalea nodded. As Kenichi finished the finishing touches on his counter and hung the stone, he looked over his work with satisfaction. The counter stood strong, ready for trading, and now all that remained was to decide what goods he would sell. But at that moment, the girl's gaze, standing nearby, fell on the clothespins that Kenichi had used to attach the sheet of paper with the prices and merchandise. Azalea immediately noticed them and explained with surprise that she really needed such clothespins because they were perfect for securing laundry after washing. Kenichi was surprised that such a simple item like clothespins could spark such interest, and immediately asked if they had something similar. Azalea nodded, but noted with chagrin that the local clothespins were usually made of thin twigs that broke when one tried to use them, and were essentially useless as they broke quickly and didn't hold laundry. Her words were important to Kenichi, because it was at that moment that it became clear to him that a product like clothespins could be his gold mine in this market. Soon, already in the market, Kenichi was actively trading. He bought a set of plates, both with and without pictures, as well as deep bowls, knives of various kinds, and handkerchiefs with pictures and gold embroidery. Kenichi carefully prepared the goods he was going to put up for sale based on his experience and the information he had received through Shangri-La. Deciding to try his hand, he headed towards the market square, relying on his luck and calculations. As soon as he found a vacant space, he approached and asked a woman standing nearby if he could place his goods here. The woman, after listening to him carefully, nodded and invited him to set up a counter. Wasting no time, Kenichi opened the inventory and pulled out the counter. He was amazed at how quickly and effortlessly the item appeared in place. The woman watching this wondered if he had an inventory skill, because what he had just done was truly a miracle, pulling out an item right out of nowhere. Kenichi, smiling slightly, nodded and replied that he did indeed have the skill, though he wasn't too experienced in using it. The woman, noticing his humble reply, admitted with a smile that she would love to have such a skill, as it would save her from having to carry heavy things. Moving closer to the counter, she inspected the goods and noted that they were of quite good quality. However, her gaze lingered on the clothespins that Kenichi used to attach a piece of paper to the counter. The woman asked how much the clothespins cost, since they were perfect for holding laundry. Kenichi, with a smile on his face, replied that he charged 1 copper coin for a pair of clothespins, which equaled 1,000 yen. The woman, not thinking long, asked for 6 pieces. Kenichi, slightly surprised that someone would dare to buy such a seemingly insignificant item, curiously asked if this was strange for the market. The woman, undaunted, replied that there were no rules against buying from neighbors, and held out the money to him as a sign that she really intended to purchase the goods. Kenichi had already sold 30 clothespins by noon, which brought him 15,000 yen. He had originally expected to sell enough goods for 10,000 yen a day to cover basic needs, but now he realized that the clothespins might be his main source of income. He realized that if he just kept buying and selling the same items, other merchants would quickly pick up on the idea and start producing similar goods, so he needed to look for new ways and ideas. At that moment, a young boy approached him, asking to see the knife displayed on the counter. Kenichi noticed that the young man had a sword hanging from his belt, and he wasn't wearing any armor, suggesting that he was a warrior or perhaps a member of a high class. Realizing it was worth being respectful, Kenichi politely demonstrated the knife, noting that it was brand new. The cost of the knife was 2 silver coins, as much as 100,000 yen. The guy admitted that the price seemed high to him, but the beauty of the blade was really impressive, and he couldn't object. However, he wanted a bigger knife. In the past world, Kenichi knew that there were strict laws to control the possession of edged and firearms, and on the Shangri-La platform, knives larger than a certain size could not be bought. However, Kenichi offered the young man the largest knife, which had a 30-centimeter long blade. The boy exclaimed, admiring the quality and beauty of the piece, and asked the price, which was 1 gold coin, equal to 200,000 yen. The young man was embarrassed, admitting that the price was high, but the beauty of the knife was worth it. Kenichi noticed his inner hesitation. He was wavering between his desire to buy and his doubts, but he couldn't lower the price. He had to charge the buyer as much as he was willing to pay. In his heart, he felt a little hurt, but he restrained himself. After a moment, the boy sighed and announced that he was taking the knife. Kenichi warmly praised his choice and added that he was giving him a sharpening stone as a gift, a brown one, coarser, and a green one, finer. The young man appreciated the gift, noting that the stone seemed handy. After the purchase, he left the counter, and Kenichi thanked him and headed back to the inn. Upon arriving, he immediately paid for 5 nights' lodging. As he was leaving the inn, Azalea inquired if he had managed to make any money. Kenichi replied that it worked out pretty well. At that moment, Azalea's gaze fell on his new t-shirt, and she noticed that he had already had a change of clothes. Later, sitting in his room enjoying the local curry, Kenichi pondered. The money was there, his clothes had been changed, but he was increasingly eager to take a hot bath, rumored to be available only to royalty and courtiers. He used a search in Shangri-La and found a steel barrel that could be used as a bathtub. The thought was simple. Fill it with water from the river, heat it over a fire, and there was real comfort. He realized that this was a way to live, but he needed to find more profitable ways to sell goods. Thinking of new directions, Kenichi decided to try his hand at selling jewelry, as silver was quite expensive in this world. He decided to focus on necklaces, brooches, and other small jewelry. Of course, he didn't have diamonds or rare crystals in his assortment, but the polished zircon he had to offer might well interest women. He hoped that this jewelry would resonate in the hearts of female customers. At that moment, a girl with anthropomorphic features approached him. She had dainty ears and a fluffy tail. Kenichi noticed that women in this city usually wore long skirts, but she had soft wool under her clothes and didn't seem to be hot at all. The girl moved closer, and Kenichi realized that perhaps he had been looking at her for too long. She sniffed cautiously and noticed with a cute smile that he smelled like spices. Kenichi remembered that it was the smell of yesterday's curry that still lingered on his clothes. The girl asked if he had any spices and hinted that he should sell them to her. Kenichi admitted that he did have spices, but he wasn't going to sell them. He realized that it would be unwise to throw away such a commodity thoughtlessly. A nearby female vendor supported him, noting that it was the right thing to do. If the monopolists in the coalition noticed such actions, he could be very unlucky. The girl with the ears, realizing the situation, turned away and started to walk away. Kenichi mentally apologized to her, but inwardly, he was glad he hadn't attracted the attention of the powerful spice monopolists. At that moment, a girl in a maid outfit came up to him and asked him to give her clothespins. Then she hesitated and added that she needed the whole 100 pieces. Kenichi was taken aback by such a request and explained that it would cost 1 silver coin. The maid explained that she needed the clothespins for use in the mansion, which explained her having the money, and placed the coin directly on his hand. Her gaze fell on Kenichi's necklace, and she asked interestedly if it was a real diamond. Kenichi admitted that it was actually ground glass, slightly deceiving, for in reality it was zircon. He said the price of the jewelry, 6 square silver coins, which was about 30,000 yen. The girl remarked in surprise that it was still quite inexpensive. Kenichi offered to set aside the jewelry for her, realizing that not everyone would be able to afford such a purchase. The girl nodded in agreement and, turning away, began to walk away. Kenichi was about to close his counter for the day. He felt satisfied. Even the necklace he brought for sale was asked to be put aside, which was a good sign. But at that moment, the beasts approached him from behind. They were friends of that anthropomorphic cat that had recently stopped by his place. A huge bear, imposing and sturdy, spoke to him respectfully and asked him to sell them spices. Kenichi immediately cut off that he could not do so, for if the dangerous men of the spice monopoly paid attention to him, he would have to forget forever about the possibility of trading in these parts. Hearing this, the beasts knelt down, begging him to help after all. Kenichi felt awkward and confused. He wasn't used to being pressured like this. Several people gathered around, urging the beasts not to insist, reminding them that Kenichi had his own life and rules too. Sighing, the merchant thought and offered a compromise. He couldn't sell them the spices, but he could treat them to a dish made with the spices on the riverbank outside of town. The beasts were surprised at the suggestion, but after a brief discussion they agreed. Kenichi emphasized that this would be a one-time thing, and together they promised to have the meal on the bank of the river that flowed by the road to the city. At this time, a nearby vendor also expressed her desire to join in the meal. Kenichi nodded in agreement. The beasts happily dragged him away, not wasting a moment. Arriving at the riverbank, Kenichi set up a small portable stove and placed pots and other kitchen equipment on it. The cat girl watched admiringly as the necessary items appeared out of nowhere, and asked if he had an inventory skill. Kenichi nodded proudly. This was truly a marvel to the beasts. Many of them had never seen anything like this before. Soon the very same vendor approached him and offered to help. Kenichi showed her the vegetables and asked her to chop them in her own way. The woman looked at the carrots with surprise. These were unfamiliar foods to her, but trusted him when she heard that all the ingredients were edible. As the food boiled and roasted, the aroma began to spread around, whetting the appetite of the beasts, who could hardly contain their drool. Kenichi, meanwhile, was roasting vegetables and meat with curry seasoning, turning everything into a flavorful dish. After a while, fried vegetables, meat and curry sauce, fresh buns, and thick potage soup appeared on the table. All the guests looked at the table in delight, anticipating the treat. The animals tasted the food with surprise and delight. It was a completely new taste for them. The merchant admitted that she had been hesitant at first when she saw the unfamiliar ingredients, but now she realized how delicious it was. Kenichi wished everyone a pleasant meal, and the meal passed in a warm, friendly atmosphere. After the meal, the beasts started joking merrily about wanting something stronger after such a hearty meal. The merchant asked them to behave more modestly. Kenichi, hearing this, offered them some alcohol on the condition that they would not tell anyone about tonight. He himself preferred not to drink alcohol and took a juice, while he bought one of the strong drinks for the beasts. The merchant noticed that Kenichi was spoiling his guests too much. Kenichi noticed that they hadn't really gotten to know each other yet, and decided to fix that. He introduced himself, whereupon the wolf, with a deep but friendly voice, called himself Nyakero. The second of the beasts, with a slightly softer tone, said his name was Nyarmaro, and the third Nyanji. The cat girl, with sparkling eyes and soft ears, introduced herself as Meyer. The female vendor, who helped them cook, introduced herself as Anama. They built a fire on the riverbank, and the warm orange light from the flames enveloped everyone in a cozy atmosphere. Later, when the mood became even lighter and more playful, the group went swimming in the cool river, enjoying the moment and having fun in the water. Kenichi helped Mare dry her wet hair, gently supporting her and smiling. After a while, tired and satisfied, everyone settled down on the soft grass by the river. Kenichi lay beside him, feeling the light night breeze on his skin. Suddenly, Mare slipped under the blanket, whispering quietly that she was warm and cozy next to him. They lay together like that, in complete silence, wrapped in the coolness of the night and the warmth of each other's close presence. At that moment, Kenichi opened his system, the very same mysterious panel that had long raised questions for him. Despite the darkness around him, he could see it brightly and clearly, yet the light from it did not illuminate his surroundings. This led him to think that perhaps the panel existed only in his mind, and that it didn't exist in the real world at all. He wondered even more where all the items he could pull out of his inventory were coming from, since his status didn't show any levels or classes. The more he pondered about this ability, the more mysterious it seemed. But tired of thinking about it for so long, Kenichi decided to leave all these mysteries for tomorrow and just enjoy the peace and quiet in the company of his new friends. The morning was a bit hazy. Yesterday's fun had left marks on their faces, and Kenichi, still sleep-deprived, was heading towards his shop. Anama, noticing his sleepy expression, smiled welcomingly, and he returned the favor. He stepped closer, noting that she'd had too much to drink last night as well, and asked how she was feeling. Anama assured him that she was fine, and Kenichi replied that he felt quite alert. That same morning, while at the inn, Kenichi heard a familiar voice. Azalea called out to him, wondering where he had been. He confessed that he had been drinking with the anthropomorphs, but at that moment, he wished for sleep more than anything else. Azalea, slightly offended, remarked that if he was out with the anthropomorphic girls, he might as well spend time with her. Kenichi tried to argue that he wasn't interested in that kind of dating, but Azalea noticed his clothes, which still had Myers' fur on them. She turned around with annoyance. Kenichi realized he had angered her, but decided to ignore it. After all, Azalea was not necessary for his measured life. Walking back to his bench, he heard a conversation nearby. The girl asked Margaret, who was standing next to him, if they had come to the store, to which she respectfully confirmed, addressing her as mistress. Kenichi saw Margaret, the maid in front of him, who had recently bought 100 clothespins, and next to her, a graceful girl with straight golden hair and intelligent eyes, dressed with a pretension of aristocracy. He turned to Margaret, asking if she had come for the goods he had set aside. She nodded, placed the money in his palm, and Kenichi handed her the pendant. Margaret thanked him and handed the jewelry to the mistress. The girl scrutinized the pendant, struck by its beauty, and asked if it was a diamond. Margaret explained that according to the seller it was glass. Kenichi, smiling, explained that it was only ground glass, but it was actually zircon. The girl asked interestedly if he had any other jewelry he could show her. He placed several other pieces on the table. Her surprise grew when she noticed that Kenichi was using the inventory skill, an ability rare and unusual for this world. Kenichi nodded, confirming that the girl was right. In fact, all the jewelry had been delivered directly from Shangri-La, a virtual store where he could order various items. At that moment, the girl made a request that caught his full attention. She introduced herself as Primura, the eldest daughter of the head of a large Maru trading company. Kenichi wondered what kind of company this was, and listened intently as he himself introduced himself in response. Primura apologized for the suddenness with which she was addressing him, and asked him to meet with her father to discuss possible cooperation. Kenichi quietly turned to Anama and whispered, asking if she knew anything about Maru's company. Anama explained that it was one of the top trading firms in the city, renowned for its fair and transparent trading. Kenichi asked if the firm was affiliated with the Coalition, a mysterious group often mentioned in conversation and considered dangerous. Anama shook her head in the negative, emphasizing that Maru was solely engaged in legal and honest trade. Those words made Kenichi think. The suggestion didn't seem so bad. If Maru really is the face of the city's trading life, establishing a connection with them would be very beneficial. He looked at Primura and asked if it was necessary to go to her father right now. The girl explained that her father was at the palace today, so it would be better to visit him during the day. Kenichi expressed understanding and Primura bowed to him, apologizing again for asking him to postpone his business. Kenichi immediately realized that despite her status, Primura remained polite and tactful even to him, a newcomer who could have easily been overlooked in this big world. Judging by her, Her father was probably also a man with good manners and respect for others. At that moment, a luxurious carriage pulled up to them and announced that it was time for the girls to return to the palace. Kenichi got into the carriage with Primura and Margaret, amazed by its beauty and grace. He had never ridden in such a luxurious carriage before. Primura, noticing his admiration, told him that the carriages of aristocrats were even more luxurious, and Margaret only confirmed her words. On the way, Primura explained that when she saw Kenichi's clothespins, she had tried through a craftsman she knew to get them manufactured, but it had proved too difficult a task and the attempts had failed. Kenichi listened attentively, realizing that he had an opportunity to carve out a profitable niche in the market with these particular goods. Kenichi thought about the technology used to make the clothespins he was selling. To create a product with perfectly contacting working surfaces required a high level of machining, like tweezers. He assumed the clothespins were made on a state-of-the-art machine with built-in computer control. Likewise, the coil-like spring could not have been forged by hand in large quantities. Extrusion technology was obviously not known in this world, and so making springs by hand made it very difficult to produce at home. Kenichi explained that although clothespins looked simple, actually producing them required advanced technology. Primura confirmed that their master had also said exactly that. At that moment, the carriage stopped and the girl noticed that they had arrived at their destination. They got out and Kenichi was dumbfounded by the majestic view of the house. He could feel the difference in status and class division of society. After a while, Primura announced that her father was ready to meet him. The elderly man, who introduced himself as Maru, the head of the trading company, greeted Kenichi warmly and thanked him for the visit. Kenichi reciprocated, saying that he had come at his daughter's request and hoped to see her again. He extended his hand in greeting, though he realized that Maru was unlikely to shake it. Nevertheless, the head of the firm appreciated the young man's politeness and expressed his pleasure at the acquaintance. At that moment, Primrose leaned toward her father and whispered something to him. Her father looked surprised to hear that Kenichi had an inventory. Kenichi confirmed that although it was small, it was available. Maru smiled and informed him that he had an inventory as well. Several items, tools, and small devices fell onto the table with a slight clinking sound, which immediately caught Kenichi's attention. He was genuinely dumbfounded to find that Maru had inventory as well. Maru confidently told him that it was because of this tool that he was able to raise his firm to a high level, taking the business to a new scale. Kenichi smiled and, with a slight irony, admitted that he used his inventory mainly as a storage area for vegetables. Maru grinned and said that such an approach, a real waste of potential. Then the young merchant, maintaining the friendly atmosphere, asked what the purpose of his invitation was. Maru, looking serious, stated bluntly that he would like to establish a wholesale supply of goods with Kenichi. Kenichi listened attentively and noted that he realized from the look on his daughter's face that choosing the right buyers could really raise the price of goods. He even suggested if it wouldn't be smarter to buy from him in bulk at a low price, and then sell more expensive. Maru hesitated and asked a counter question about what would happen if Kenichi found out he was reselling his goods. In response, Kenichi firmly stated that in that case, he would stop supplying silver jewelry. Maru warned, however, that competitors would surely offer better deals, and the lust for immediate gain would blind the merchant to the more favorable terms. He urged prudence, emphasizing that such behavior, the worst mistake in business. But then, unexpectedly, Maru offered to buy the goods at 5 times the normal price, asking if Kenichi would agree to such a generous step. He immediately replied in agreement, realizing the benefit of the deal. Maru was pleasantly impressed and clarified how confident the young man was. Kenichi only nodded, as the opportunity to buy items for a couple thousand yen, and sell them for tens of thousands of yen seemed like a great start. He realized that if he succeeded, even a couple of good deals would give him a good living. Nevertheless, he decided not to stop and continued to develop his business. Maru extended his hand and Kenichi shook it with a smile, sealing the cooperation agreement. Thus, they signed a contract for the wholesale sale of clothespins and jewelry. At Maru's company, the wholesale price of silverware ranged from 500,000 to 1,000,000 yen. They also sold jewelry with processed zirconium and glass, which were more popular than real jewelry due to imperfect processing techniques. The sale of just a few pieces of silverware had brought Kenichi a profit of over 1,000,000 yen, and his wallet in the Shangri-La system had been replenished to a 7-figure sum. Now he realized that he would be able to lead a measured and peaceful life. Kenichi stood, concentrating on drawing the outline of the future base he was going to set up deep in the forest. The place was shrouded in rumors and fears, and the townspeople avoided it, considering it dangerous and unpredictable. Kenichi understood why though, because that was where the monster had attacked him, and most would consider such actions insane. But he didn't plan to go deeper than 200 meters, because that was the area he thought was safe enough for a measured life. His goal was simple: to live a quiet life, away from the hustle and bustle. He was not looking for luxury, so he was going to be satisfied with frozen food and fast food, because it was familiar and convenient. His future plans included the use of electrical appliances, but it was important to maintain privacy so that no one would notice his techno-innovations. Kenichi was determined that as soon as he found a suitable location, he would clear the lot, cut down a few trees, clear the space, and begin construction. He was flipping through a website with instructions when a section on building a house out of logs caught his eye. It seemed to him an ideal option, reliable, simple, and suitable for living far from civilization. Kenichi was determined to build his house in the forest and start leading a quiet, measured life in this new world. Standing in the spacious field, he carefully mowed the grass with a lawnmower. Step by step, he cleared a path away from the river bank, the very place where he and his friends had recently been drinking and relaxing. The path to the forest was overgrown with tall grass, and after clearing it, Kenichi wondered if it would be comfortable to ride a bicycle on. All that remained was to spread a layer of gravel to make the path smoother and more comfortable. Gasoline for the lawnmower was noticeably more expensive than usual, and Kenichi regretfully realized that he had no choice. Such fuel was not widely sold in this world. But he didn't give up and soon poured gravel along the road, giving it a neat look. After that, he went to an online store and bought a chainsaw, a tool that would help him clear a place for the future house. The hard work began. He carefully made a triangular cut in the trunks of large trees on the side he wanted to fell them. Then, he carefully drove a wedge in, and the tree fell to the ground with a clatter. Sweat trickled down his face as he brushed off the dust and realized that now he would have to remove all the fallen trunks. A thought flashed through his mind, wondering how much stuff his inventory could hold. He tried putting a whole tree in it, but it wouldn't fit. So Kenichi sawed the trunk into 10-meter-long pieces. He put them in one at a time. In this way, the inventory could handle it. Realizing that the logs could be turned into firewood, he optimistically thought that he would be able to place most of the things he needed in the inventory in the same way. All that remained was to get rid of the large stumps. They needed to be split with a chainsaw and dug out piece by piece, but even with tools this task seemed impossible. Kenichi decided to buy an excavator. It was time to use more powerful machinery to finish the job. The machine appeared instantly, as if it materialized right in front of him. Even though the excavator was used, with some rust on the hull, the main thing for Kenichi was different. Now, he would be able to do hard work without getting tired or risking his health. He climbed into the cab to try out the machine. Suddenly there was a distinctive engine thud, a diesel roar. It made him wonder about fuel. All the heavy equipment ran on diesel fuel, but where would he get it in this world? Looking into Shangri-La, Kenichi realized that diesel fuel was not sold there. However, a special reagent was available, a substance capable of converting kerosene into diesel. The problem was that there was no ordinary kerosene, only illuminating kerosene for camping lamps, filtered and soot-free when burning. The cost of 1 liter was 1,800 yen, expensive, but there was no choice. Kenichi wondered if whale oil was even more expensive in the market. He wasn't sure if this method would work, but he decided to give it a try. Kenichi decided to try out a new method and called for a diesel-powered generator. Although he had used generators often, the diesel one was new to him. The device was foreign-made, and the instructions were in an unfamiliar language, so he couldn't understand it. At first, he just filled the fuel and tried to start the unit. After a few seconds, the motor started. Kenichi was glad. Kenichi turned on the lights, they lit up. However, due to severe voltage fluctuations, the electricity was unstable and not suitable for constant household use. It was the first time electric light appeared in this world, but also the noise from the generator was very loud. Realizing that it was inconvenient to use at home, Kenichi decided to put the generator in his inventory. Now he also had an excavator in his inventory, and he was going to work with it. Kenichi decided that he would go to town the next day to deal with fuel and other issues. In the morning, back at the hotel, Kenichi felt the urge to bathe in the bathtub, although he could have bathed in the river, but the bathtub seemed cozier and calmer. Azalea greeted him warmly and asked with interest where he had been. Kenichi explained that he had been busy preparing a spot in the forest for a future home. He wanted to say a proper goodbye to the place before starting a new life. This surprised Azalea. They had an unspoken taboo. Living in the forest was forbidden. Kenichi nodded in understanding. However, he had already set up an infrared flashlight and sound alarm in the forest, at least some safety measures. His biggest concern was the insects. His arm was covered in bite marks, and they literally ate him in the forest. Azalea recommended buying a magic insect stone, colorless and odorless, that would repel mosquitoes and flies. Kenichi was surprised to ask where it could be purchased. The girl explained that the stone was sold at a hardware store near the market. Heading there, Kenichi entered the store, and suddenly behind him, he heard the voice of an old man, the owner, asking what he was looking for. When Kenichi turned around, the old man behind the counter of the hardware store looked at him carefully and remarked that he hadn't seen him in these parts before. Kenichi explained that he had recently opened his own shop in the market, and they were now fellow traders. The elder was interested and said he was willing to pay a good amount of money for something foreign and unusual. Kenichi thought for a moment, then offered some fresh oranges in exchange for a discount on the magical insect stone. The elder admitted that he had never seen such fruit, and the stone was worth 2 silver coins, but he would make a nice discount for Kenichi. Kenichi was grateful for such generosity. As he left the store, he was greeted by Anama, a female merchant with a kind smile. She praised Kenichi for his business skills and noted that he had managed to buy the stone cheaper from the old man, which was simply admirable. Anama explained that the old man had a good reputation and connections in the city. He was a walking encyclopedia, and Kenichi would benefit from befriending him. While they were talking, Kenichi's gaze happened to fall on a poster of a manhunt for dangerous people. He asked Anama who those individuals were. Anama lowered her eyes and admitted with some trepidation that they try not to talk about these people out loud. But about 40 leagues from here, about 60 kilometers away, there is a terrifying group called the Shaga. Kenichi noticed that Anama had become more agitated and clarified if they were indeed bandits. She confirmed that they were a rather large and violent gang that camped in the ruins of an old castle and ravaged the surrounding villages and towns. Anama soon noticed that Kenichi was about to close up shop for the day and wished him good luck. Kenichi nodded, noting that despite the dangers, what he had heard about the bandits was useful information. Kenichi looked carefully at the change that remained in his hand. The profit for the day amounted to a little over 20,000 yen. Despite the good sales, he noticed that with the appearance of clothespins in Maru Trading Company stores, his customer flow had dropped significantly. This became a tangible problem, and to improve matters, he went to the forest again the next day. There he took a backhoe out of his inventory and, sitting in the cab, decided to devote the entire day to working with this powerful machine. The sense of power emanating from the machine was so impressive that it seemed impossible for one man to operate it alone. But despite that, it was a real pleasure to operate the machine, and that was how a man's true desire manifested itself. Kenichi decided to use this power to carefully prepare the plot for the future house. It was necessary to properly place the building and level the land. However, after such a large purchase as an excavator, his financial situation began to rapidly deteriorate. The balance on the account was cracking at the seams. To remedy the situation, Kenichi went to the palace of the Maru Trading Company. Primura greeted him at the entrance and cheerfully informed him that they were expecting him. She added that many buyers were already interested in his wares. Kenichi admitted that he would be happy to supply more, but since his items were rare and valuable, they were not easy to obtain, for which he apologized profusely. Primura immediately calmed him down, saying that she understood the difficulty of the situation and there was nothing she could do about it. Kenichi then entered the office of the head of the company, the elderly and influential Maru. Kenichi carefully arranged a variety of jewelry and utensils on the table, creating an impressive display. A vessel stood out among them, a funerary urn containing sugar, as well as exquisite cameo necklaces, bracelets, and other jewelry. Primura took one of the bracelets and, putting it on her hand, noted its beauty with admiration. She immediately asked her father to let her keep the bracelet. Mura asked with a smile what would be done if she took all the jewelry, then what would be left for the customers. He soon turned to Kenichi to ask about the cost per bracelet. Kenichi quickly realized that the head of the company could not refuse his daughter, and calmly explained to Primrose that the bracelet had a golden hue, but was only thinly coated, clad. The girl asked interestedly if this meant that the gold was applied with mercury. Kenichi noticed her deep knowledge, knew that electric current was actually used instead of mercury, but decided not to complicate the explanation. He also told her that the craftsman who created the jewelry was a very peculiar person. However, the whole story was a bit of a fabrication. Soon Moreau raised the question of sugar. He said that sugar and salt were under strict government control, and he personally could not buy them freely. Kenichi was surprised. Sugar costs about 200 yen per kilogram in Shangri-La, and he had expected to make a good profit. However, he now realized that in reality, trading this commodity is much more difficult due to strict restrictions. Nevertheless, Moreau noted that cameo jewelry, such as Kenichi's, is especially popular among the nobility. A maid standing nearby also asked to see her jewelry, and Kenichi gladly showed her several pieces. In the end, the amount he received from the deal with the Maru Trading Company was an impressive 15 gold coins, the equivalent of 3 million yen. This money he decided to invest in buying a log house to finally stop living in a tent. With the thought of trying, he clicked a button on the Shangri-La website, preparing to start a new life in a more comfortable environment. Suddenly, a mountain of planks appeared in front of Kenichi, so many that they collapsed to the ground, creating chaos. He stood stunned and couldn't understand what this contingency was, and why everything had already been dismantled. He logged back into the website and carefully read that in order for the house to become a reality, he would have to assemble it himself. Kenichi was truly horrified when he realized that he would have to build the house himself. It was only now that he realized why the house was so cheap. 1.7 million yen for such a home was too little. He looked at the pile of boards and didn't know where to start. Despite a lot of information he had gathered, he wasn't sure he could build the rafters and connect all the elements himself. Squatting down, he suddenly remembered his backhoe, which could make the job much easier. Rereading the instructions, Kenichi realized that the house was built with thin planks that were attached to each other without the use of traditional beams and posts. He realized that he had gone too far to back out and was determined to see it through to the end. There was no turning back the money. At one point, he accidentally stepped on broken glass, one of many that had fallen during the unloading of the boards. But in spite of minor setbacks, he set about building and gradually learned each step by instruction. Periodically, he returned to his shop to keep his mind on business. Thus passed 1 week. Then another week passed, and the house slowly but surely took shape, though many things broke and needed reworking. All in all, it took a full month for Kenichi to build a real house for the first time in his life. When the construction was complete, he stood in front of his new home, still empty inside, but with endless possibilities for improvement. He could put in a kitchen, a sink, organize the space to suit his needs. Memories came flooding back of electricity. He used a gasoline-powered lamp now, but he wondered about more modern lighting. The generator was too noisy and fuel-intensive, and the consumption of gasoline and illuminating kerosene was still not insignificant. Kenichi wondered just how many solar panels he would need to live autonomously in the forest. Another month passed, filled with hard work, sweat, and perseverance. Kenichi overcame each task step by step, and finally, as he stood in front of his hand-built house, satisfaction flashed through his soul. The house, though modest, looked sturdy and neat. The fence, painted with a protective compound from the Shangri-La website, framed the plot, creating a feeling of comfort and security. The perimeter of the fence was lined with velvets, their lush colors not only pleasing to the eye, but also successful in repelling insects, and together with the magic stone, they turned the plot into a zone of comfort and safety. Near the house, he dug a small vegetable garden, put a simple outdoor toilet, and even figured out how to use the waste as fertilizer. It was all very similar to his old life, but yet completely different. He put in a sink and a kitchenette, and solved the electricity issue with 20 solar panels. Each cost 10,000 yen, but the result was worth it. Instead of storage, he simply used inventory. In addition, he bought a powerful battery that could be directly charged by connecting the panels to it. He felt like he was beginning to realize exactly how it was possible to live here, simply but comfortably. And so he lay in a barrel filled with hot water, dissolving into the vapor rising into the night sky. He looked up into the starry sky and felt, this is what happiness is all about. Kenichi, submerged up to his shoulders in the hot water, leaned on the edge of the barrel and sighed with a slight smile. He muttered quietly that he felt like an old man enjoying life peacefully. And then he thought, yes, at his age, that's allowed. The barrel stood directly under the open sky, among the trees, next to his house, built with his own hands. He drew water from the river and carried it with his equipment, and before taking a bath, he rode along the forest path on his mountain bike, as if checking his possessions. It was his first full bath since he had been in this world. The first truly hot bath, not in a hotel, not in a river, but here in his own private nook. He looked up, to where a starry sky dotted with bright dots stretched between the crowns of the trees. This was his base, his quiet corner, his private castle. Not everyone would be able to go through what Kenichi had endured. He had truly achieved what he had dreamed of, a secluded, measured life in a world full of magic and wonder, but with a rhythm he could control himself. He had started a new chapter, no fuss, no danger. But just as he allowed himself to relax, the forest reminded him of himself. Two brightly glowing eyes slowly emerged from the thick bushes, a few meters away. It had been a month since Kenichi had settled into his home. As time passed, the forest stopped being intimidating and began to open up to him. To fill the long and quiet evenings, he purchased a digital camera with SLR optics. His hobby had no purpose. He took pictures for himself, simply capturing moments that seemed beautiful to him. The photo album gradually filled up with images of a foreign, but almost native world. One day, as he wandered along a stream, a red flower caught his eye. He took a few pictures, came closer, and noticed a shadow in the grass. It almost blended in with the ground, but its breathing gave away the presence of life. Looking closer, he realized it was a cat, large, spotted, with a muscular body and short, thick fur. Its flanks rose slowly, laboriously. A broken arrow protruded from a wound in its side. Kenichi froze, his heart quickening its rhythm. He didn't know how dangerous this beast was. But when he tried to get up, and when it roared and settled back to the ground, fear gave way to sympathy. He quickly constructed a semblance of protection, wrapping a soft pillow around his arm and securing it with rope. His neck was covered by a motorcycle helmet he'd bought in advance for traveling. Despite the preparation, the fear remained, but there was no other way out. He crouched down and, carefully grasping the shaft of the arrow, began to pull. The beast tensed, gave a muffled growl, but didn't move. Soon Kenichi, gathering all his caution, was able to carefully extract the broken arrow from the beast's wound. The beast was so exhausted and depleted that it offered no resistance, as if resigned to its fate. Kenichi noticed that pus was already beginning to appear in the wound. The inflammatory process had clearly gone ahead, and immediate treatment was required. He quickly switched to a plan of action. The first order of business was to thoroughly flush the wound with saline solution to remove dirt and reduce the risk of infection. This was followed by disinfection, which he paid special attention to, being careful not to cause the animal any unnecessary pain. Kenichi then purchased a special antimicrobial ointment. It was similar in composition to animal dermatitis medications. He applied it gently around the wound, making sure to cover the entire inflamed area. After treating the wound, he gave the animal an anesthetic, hoping that it would ease the cat's suffering a little. Despite all the measures he had taken, he couldn't shake off the anxiety of whether it was enough, and whether he could help the beast alone. Kenichi realized that leaving the cat in the forest would condemn it to certain death. However, the inventory did not allow him to take the animal with him. Its physical size and weight made it impossible to hide the beast and keep it safe. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Kenichi decided to purchase a large cart to transport the sick cat with minimal risk. Approaching the cat with caution, he quickly and carefully lifted it into his arms. The weight of the animal was heavier than he expected, about 30 pounds. But Kenichi did his best not to drop or damage the sick cat. When he arrived at the house, he carried the cat to the warm bed he had prepared in advance. The animal didn't even try to move. Its breathing was barely audible. Kenichi wondered if perhaps his efforts weren't enough. In this world where there were no traditional veterinarians, one could only hope for healing magic or some other means of help that he didn't know about yet. The next day, after visiting the town and telling Anama about his find and help, Kenichi was met with an unexpected reaction. Anama laughed, finding the whole situation quite strange and even funny, as only a crazy person could bring a wild forest cat into the house, and a sick one at that. Kenichi remembered how the old man at the hardware store had been ironic, expressing his doubts that healing magic could help the beast. This old man explained that the forest cat, an extremely rare and expensive animal, its pelt was highly prized. He even suggested taking the beast to the guild, but Kenichi firmly rejected the idea, realizing that it could mean the worst for the cat. At that moment, Mare, an anthropomorph girl, suddenly approached him. She whispered that Kenichi smelled like a forest cat, a sign of a close bond with the animal. Mare gently hugged him and shouted enthusiastically that she wanted to see the rescued beast. Kenichi was surprised and recognized her as the same girl he had met before. Soon they headed into the forest together, and on the way Mare told him that forest cats are sacred creatures to their people, messengers of God, not just wild animals. They are protected and honored, and harming them is considered a great sin. She explained that ordinary people see the forest cat as nothing more than valuable fur, but to the anthropomorphs it is a symbol of divine protection and forest spirit, an angel guarding the balance of nature. Mare spoke with resentment of the dogmen, the other anthropomorphs, who revere the magical wolf and are in a long-standing feud with her people. They were probably the ones who had injured the cat and wanted to kill him. Kenichi realized the gravity of the situation. He was caught up in an ancient conflict between tribes, and his act of saving the cat took on a special meaning. Mare had claimed him as her own, for no one else would have cared so much for the sacred animal. He was not ready to fully accept this status, for the rescue had been an accident, but he realized that nothing could be changed. As she approached the house, Mare did not hide her admiration. The makeshift house standing in the middle of the forest looked impressive. She stepped inside and saw the cat lying on the bedding. Kenichi noticed that the bowl next to the cot was empty, which meant that the cat had eaten a little. He hoped that the beast's appetite would soon fully recover. In the meantime, Mare carefully examined the wound on the animal's thigh and noted with sadness how seriously it had been damaged. She showed genuine sympathy for the beast. Kenichi took the antimicrobial ointment and carefully applied it to the wound, being careful not to cause pain. However, the cat immediately began licking the ointment off, causing him some concern. Attempts to stop the animal were unsuccessful, so he decided to purchase a protective collar, a special device that was placed around the neck to prevent it from licking the injured areas. Putting the collar on, he spoke softly to the cat, begging it to understand and take his action. Mare, watching this, asked Kenichi if he was a veterinarian. He shook his head in the negative, explaining that he believed himself capable of handling the wound treatment on his own, albeit without professional experience. Kenichi watched as Mare collapsed on the bed. Expressing her appreciation for his act, she called him a good man, noting that most would have done otherwise and taken the cat to the guild. The girl stated that she was very worried about the forest cat and therefore intended to stay around to help. Kenichi was taken aback by such determination and wondered if she was serious in her words. He realized that there was only one bed, but Mare quickly reassured him, telling him that they could sleep together safely. This fact made Kenichi wonder if all anthropomorph girls were really so open and fearless. Mare, looking at him, confidently asserted that the one who saved the forest cat couldn't be a bad person. These words caused Kenichi to think deeply. He didn't quite understand the values and traditions of the New World yet, but he felt that he was in an unusual environment, and Mare seemed especially nice to him. The next day, Kenichi continued to care for the cat, devoting time to treatment and attention, while Mare helped him in the vegetable garden and showed him how to hunt forest birds. The cat gradually recovered, woke up in the afternoon and was able to eat, which made both of them happy. Later, Mare left and Kenichi went outside, deciding to do some vegetable gardening. Working in the vegetable garden turned out to be unexpectedly pleasant. The electric cultivator he had bought through Shangri-La was very handy, No need to exert much effort, just to guide it. In half an hour, he had plowed the entire prepared area, mentally glad that he had avoided hours of hoeing and subsequent back pain. Kenichi stood by his vegetable garden and pondered what crops to plant. The usual options, tomatoes, eggplants, potatoes, seemed obvious, but he didn't want to make any mistakes, especially without much experience. To avoid risking his crop and wasting seeds, he decided to start only with tomatoes. He realized that it was possible to buy vegetables on Shangri-La, and perhaps farming seemed like an unnecessary luxury in this world. But if he was aiming for a measured life, it wouldn't be real without planting. Even though he was using modern means, it was still his labor. Watering was also a problem. Carrying heavy canisters from the river each time became more and more tedious. That's when Kenichi thought of a well. He didn't need a full-fledged, deep one, as on the farms. A narrow, hand-drilled shaft would suffice. The main thing was to get water, and its availability in such a wooded area he did not question. The strong trees surrounding his house spoke for themselves. There was plenty of moisture underground. In the evening he was tired and went to bed early. But in the silence of the night, as soon as he opened his eyes, strange shadows appeared on the ceiling. The next second something heavy fell on top of him. It turned out to be a forest cat that had recovered enough to be able to climb up elevations. Kenichi looked at him with surprise and joy. He realized that he was already strong enough to jump like that. The protective collar was no longer needed. Removing it carefully, he let the beast stand up freely. The cat jumped to the floor, lingered at the door, turned around as if saying goodbye, and, limping slightly, walked off into the forest. Kenichi followed him with a glance. It seemed to him that he had done the right thing, had done everything in his power. Now the forest cat was free again, and he could return to his nature. A few days passed. Kenichi stopped going to the market and focused entirely on the work around the house. He delved deeper into making the well, and finally managed to get what he wanted. The pump connected to the PVC pipe began to deliver water, and it filled the bathtub barrel with a splash. He watched the process with pleasure, realizing that he had done it all himself. The work gave him pleasure. He loved the way the space around him came alive. He looked up at the sky. Evening had already descended. The sky had darkened. He decided to heat up the water and bathe, tossing wood into the stove, heating the barrel. At that moment, when the fire was already burning, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, he saw Primrose. Her appearance in the middle of the forest was so unexpected that he couldn't believe his eyes. She stood alone, unguarded, among the shadows of the trees. She explained that she was concerned about his long absence from the market, and the anthropomorph girl had shown her where he lived. He was surprised that she had come alone, unaccompanied, and wondered if she was afraid of monsters. But she only said with a slight smile that if he lived here, then everything was under control. She then mentioned that she had heard a story about a rescued forest cat. Kenichi, scratching the back of his head in embarrassment, remained silent. At that moment, Primura noticed the backhoe left outside the house. She pointed at it and asked in amazement what kind of steel giant it was. Kenichi inwardly berated himself for being careless. The equipment was too flashy, and he hadn't thought to hide it. Thinking quickly, he called the excavator a summoned creature and said it was his magical assistant. Primura, stunned, clarified if he really had magic. He discreetly replied that he could say he did, and immediately asked her not to spread the word. The girl, a little relieved, promised to keep the secret. She added that she'd always known he was an unusual man, and now one of his secrets was revealed to her. Kenichi realized that this moment brought them closer together, but at the same time, it exposed his vulnerability a bit. Despite that, he trusted Primrose as a merchant, as the daughter of a respectable man, and as a girl who could understand other people's burdens. Kenichi thought about what would happen if his secrets one day became known to the royal nobility. At best, he would be used, at worst, disposed of as soon as he was no longer useful. These were not fears, but sober reflections. Primrose apparently sensed his doubts. She didn't want something like this to happen either. There was something more in her words. The interests of the Moreau Trading Company, which did not want to lose such an unusual and profitable partner. The royal nobles were used to taking, but giving in return was not part of their principles. Kenichi agreed with this conclusion. At that moment, he noticed the sky outside the window beginning to darken, and then realized that the city gates were already closed. Primura took one look at him, and only nodded. The answer was obvious. He wondered if she was really going to stay here for the night. She raised an eyebrow in response, and asked with businesslike calmness if he wanted her to spend the night outside. He admitted that there was only one bed in the house, but Primura wasn't embarrassed. It wasn't unusual for someone used to traveling on business trips to sleep in the same room as a man. Kenichi realized that she wasn't at all as simple as she might seem, and had apparently already made up her mind to stay. To object would be pointless. Primura's gaze fell on the metal barrel. She stepped closer, looked at the structure puzzled, and asked what it was. Kenichi explained that it was a bathtub. When she heard that, she excitedly declared that she had to try it out. A few minutes later, hot steam was already enveloping the space. Primura sat in the barrel filled with warm water, leaning back relaxed. Behind the wall, a couple steps away from her, was Kenichi. She called out to him and clarified if he was nearby. He confirmed that he was. He stayed not because he wanted to, but because she admitted she was scared alone. Her voice trembled like a little girl afraid to leave the room in the dark. Primura, still sitting in the hot water barrel, apologized softly. Kenichi replied, listening to her without moving from his seat. She then explained with quiet uncertainty that she was in the bathtub and asked if he could come out. He asked if she minded. Her affirmative answer sounded calm and without a shadow of embarrassment. He realized that if she said he could, then he really could. He was no longer at the age to lose his head at the mere sight of a naked girl. He stepped out from around the corner and asked how she liked the water. Primura noted with a satisfied tone that she hadn't expected to be able to take a bath so easily. Then she wondered aloud that to recreate something like this from the nobility would require a stone room, a boiler, plumbing, and tens of millions in coins. Kenichi watched her with interest, catching the movements, the facial expression slightly covered by the steam. Her voice was calm, but a blush was showing through on her cheeks. She was still sitting in the water, naked, and it was apparently beginning to embarrass her. Kenichi turned away and said she could leave if it embarrassed her, but Primura suddenly objected loudly that she should let him stay. He remarked that if she was really scared, she could come another day, at a more convenient time. Primura, however, only grinned. Opportunities, she said, were rarely given in the trade and should not be missed. He leaned against the wall, trying not to look in her direction, and asked with a slight irony, what if he had turned out to be something other than who he claimed to be? The answer followed immediately. The savior of the beast men and the forest cat can't be a bad person. Anyone else who saw a wounded animal would just finish it off and take it to the guild to be rewarded. The water rumbled, and Primrose stood up and said she was going out. Kenichi, still turned away, handed her the bundle, robe, and belt. He explained briefly that it was best not to take them off until the body had cooled down. She silently accepted the items, and a few minutes later they entered the house. She sat down on the bed and, running her hand over the fabric of the robe, asked if he was going to sell them. Kenichi calmly replied that he planned to, but in limited quantities. He then handed her a mug with a drink in it. Taking a small sip, Primura noted the sweet taste with a slight sourness and asked if it was milk. He explained that it was milk mixed with fruit juice. She inhaled deeply and said that with such an assortment of goods, he could become the richest merchant not only in Dalia, but in the entire state. Kenichi only shook his head. He did not aspire to riches. A simple and peaceful life of eating good food, practicing his craft, and not depending on the whims of the nobility was enough for him. After a brief pause, he shifted his gaze to Primrose. Inner excitement was replaced by a quiet desire to share something personal. He took the notebook, carefully opened one of the pages, and showed her the drawing. It was a forest cat, the same one he had recently rescued. Primura scrutinized the image, then asked in surprise if he was the author. Kenichi nodded affirmatively. He said that money was the only thing that mattered to him, the ability to craft and paint. Primrose recognized the wounded cat in the painted animal and leaned closer with interest. She said wistfully that with such talent, he should have been a court painter. To this, Kenichi only grinned and gently asked her not to be flattered. Then, with a slight smile, he offered to paint her portrait. The girl was surprised for a second, but without hesitation, she gracefully sat down on the edge of the bed, straightening her back and bowing her head slightly. Kenichi concentrated on the task at hand, letting the pencil move across the paper, following the lines of her silhouette. Time flew by unnoticed. When he finally finished, Primura looked at the result with interest. Her eyes widened in surprise. She was dumbfounded at how accurately the expression on her face had been rendered. After a moment, she asked if she could keep the drawing. Kenichi nodded silently. The girl clutched the sheet to her chest as if it were something precious, personal, and warm. By evening, he had set up a new metal bed next to his own, on which Primura immediately made herself comfortable. Kenichi himself laid down and opened the interface of his system. His thoughts returned to Shangri-La. There lurked a problem he had been pondering for more than the first time. What would happen if he decided to transfer too much money to the site? If there are no limits, then this resource becomes a black hole devouring capital. As long as you have money, you can buy everything. But what if the royal family gets access to the system? Billions of yen will be transacted. Money will flow out into the unknown. And once it goes to Shangri-La, it never comes back. If that happens, the treasury could be empty in a matter of months. An economic collapse would follow. He'll be blamed. Then there will be chases, accusations, flight. One man destroying one country after another, a frightening prospect. He didn't want that. That was why he had to limit himself, lead the life of a simple citizen, use resources wisely and carefully. There was another idea, of course, to try to sell things on Shangri-La that had no value in this world, but might be valuable in his world. That seemed like a way out. But to realize what he had in mind, he needed a map. If he had it, many problems would disappear in an instant. Kenichi wondered how he could find a way to get it. It was morning, and Kenichi headed to Maru's trading company with Primura. He realized that after his business partner's daughter had spent the night at his home, he should at least try to explain things. They boarded a public carriage and headed into town. Tension was building in Kenichi's chest. He was sure Maru would be angry. As they approached the mansion, Primrose immediately noticed her father standing at the entrance. His expression was stern. He immediately questioned where she had been, since she hadn't even left word for him. Primura calmly replied that she had been outside the city and couldn't return before the gates closed, so she had stayed the night at Kenichi's house. Kenichi added that he couldn't afford to leave her outside, so he invited her inside. To Kenichi's surprise, Maru didn't get angry and even apologized for the inconvenience. This stunned Kenichi somewhat. He had expected a rebuke or at least an admonishment. Perhaps it was a matter of trust or the fact that there was too much of an age difference between him and Primrose. Moreau sighed heavily and muttered that he couldn't figure out who his daughter had taken after. Primura looked at her father with a smile and asked him that wasn't it obvious. After all, once he heard about the lucrative deal, neither a battlefield strewn with arrows nor a forest teeming with monsters could stop him. She walked over to her father and hugged him tightly. Kenichi noted to himself that Maru was clearly concerned, not only as the head of the trading company, but also as a father who feared for the safety of his stubborn daughter. And Kenichi himself wouldn't want her to get into trouble either. Continuing to hug her father, Primura excitedly told him that she hadn't wasted any time and had managed to purchase new goods. Moreau only shook his head, saying that she constantly made him worry. Later, in his office, Kenichi laid out the samples he had brought, new robes and towels on the table. Moreau was genuinely impressed. He admitted that he had never seen such a fabric before. It was pleasant to the touch and perfectly absorbent, perfect for use after a bath. Kenichi confirmed that the cloth was indeed of high quality. And then he pulled out another item, an elegant silk negligee. Both Maru and Primrose were dumbfounded. Kenichi, without embarrassment, explained that such an outfit could melt even the coldest heart if worn in front of a man one liked. Maru pressed his palm to his face in despair, unable to understand how Kenichi had the courage to say such things. Kenichi, meanwhile, sat down on the couch and apologized, realizing that he had clearly overreacted. At that moment, the door opened and a maid entered the room carrying a pile of books. Seeing this, Kenichi realized that in a large trading company, the amount of bookkeeping was corresponding. Maru explained that the accounting rules had recently been updated, and he was in the process of rewriting them. Kenichi was interested and asked what it was about. Moreau told him that it was a double-entry system that had been developed in the Empire not too long ago. Kenichi thought for a moment, but Moreau asked if he had heard of it. He nodded, saying that he had only heard of it. According to Moreau, the system was invented by the head of a merchant guild in one of the border trading cities, and the method quickly spread throughout the empire. For such accomplishments, the man even wants to be appointed Minister of Trade. Kenichi thought again, this was all too familiar. He didn't realize if it was a coincidence. At that moment, Primura turned to her father, reminding him that the very experiment was to take place today. Moreau replied that the master had already informed him that it was ready, and they would begin after lunch. Primura offered to take a look at what Kenichi had at the same time. Moreau clarified if it was outside, and Primura nodded, explaining that the thing was quite large. Kenichi wasn't sure if she was talking about the barrel bath. Primura turned to him asking if he would mind. Kenichi replied that he wouldn't mind, and promised to come back after lunch. He didn't have much time left before lunch, and he decided that now was a good time to try and register with the Adventurers Guild. Kenichi arrived at the guild building. The girl behind the counter, noticing him, inquired if he wished to join. She explained that the entry fee was 1 silver coin. She also clarified that if he was already a member of another guild, he needed to show his ID. Kenichi handed her the stone. The girl soon returned it, informing him that the registration was complete. He could now read the assignments on the bulletin board, and for special assignments, go to any of the windows. Kenichi thanked her. He noted to himself that the Merchant Guild ID really did work everywhere. Since the matter was quickly settled, he decided to check out the bulletin board. On it hung quests to collect rare herbs, search for missing items and people. On top of the others were pinned flyers with information on tracking down criminals. Suddenly Kenichi saw a familiar face. It was a poster of the Shaga gang he had heard about recently. It said there were 50 men in the gang. There was a reward for catching each one, and a bounty for destroying the entire gang. Kenichi shook his head, and turned away from the board. He realized that none of this had anything to do with him. With those thoughts, he headed back towards the Maru mansion. When he returned, he was quite surprised. Moreau and Primura were waiting for him with a demonstration of a new device. It was a manual water pump. Moreau, standing next to the newly installed pump, turned to Kenichi with interest and asked directly if he knew what this device was. Kenichi nodded. He leisurely stepped closer and, lightly touching the lever, explained that the water was lifted upward from the well by the alternating movements, lowering and raising the lever. The mechanism was simple but effective. Moreau raised his eyebrows in surprise. It amazed him how Kenichi was once again aware of something that had only recently come to the Empire. He excitedly explained that the device had spread quickly, and as soon as they had heard about it, they had immediately ordered a craftsman to make it. The pump was ready, and now, in front of them, was beginning its work. Kenichi involuntarily wondered. This world seemed to know no limits. Copyright law didn't exist here. Copying and adopting other people's ideas was commonplace. He shifted his gaze to the pump. Like double-entry bookkeeping, this mechanism seemed too elaborate for a random invention. The thought crept into his mind, maybe he wasn't the only one here. Perhaps there was another person living somewhere who came from another world. Maybe the same merchant who was now being touted as a minister. At that moment, the pump began to work, and with a quiet squelch, clear water flowed from it. Moreau clapped his hands happily and said that the device was excellent and that it should be put into mass production immediately. It was exactly as Kenichi had expected. The pump, as a practical and obvious thing, was admirable. By contrast, his idea of a bathtub barrel was almost unimpressive. He felt a little offended and decided to try to suggest something quite different, something that was really out of the ordinary. He walked over to Primrose and, taking out his notebook, unfolded the page with the drawing of the bicycle in front of her. He watched her reaction with interest and asked her what she thought of this mode of transportation. The girl leaned toward the image in surprise, her eyes widening. She asked what kind of device it was. Kenichi explained that in order to ride, all you have to do is push off the ground with your feet. Primura, still surprised, showed the drawing to her father. He laughed, looking at the image with genuine amusement, and admitted that he had never seen anything like it. Primura added with a smile that Kenichi definitely had a great sense of humor. Kenichi remained serious. He knew very well, anyone who made the first move always faced ridicule. And if he were to say right now that it was possible to fly through the air, they would just roll with laughter. He explained with a stone face that despite appearances, it was easier and much less tiring to move around on such a device than just running. Still, the laughter did not stop. Moreau, wiping his eyes, admitted that indeed, the idea was interesting. And if there was time, perhaps they would try to realize it. Kenichi realized that it was a polite refusal. Usually nothing followed such words. He shifted his gaze to Primrose. She was still struggling to hold back a smile. A month passed. One day, while walking through the city, Kenichi was surprised to see a bicycle. Unassuming, simplistic, but it was the exact same machine. And as it turned out, Moreau had started selling it. Apparently, a couple of days after that conversation, Moreau realized how useful it could be and decided to build a prototype. After rolling it around the streets, they introduced the new product to the public. Kenichi thought respectfully that Moreau was indeed a talented merchant. As soon as he saw a profitable idea, he went straight to work. Bicycles were becoming more and more plentiful. Government couriers were buying them to get their messages across faster. And in return for the original idea, Kenichi received 5 gold coins, the equivalent of 1,000,000 yen. Of course, it was many times less than the patent payments in his home world, but the fact that he had been paid was gratifying. Officially, however, Moreau was considered the inventor. He was awarded, praised, and allowed to take the family name, a sign of high recognition. Kenichi didn't mind. He didn't seek fame and preferred to remain in the shadows. A few more months passed. Bicycles, or as they were called here, trains, were becoming more and more common on the streets. But Kenichi's life remained the same. He bought useful things from the old owner of the hardware store and continued to improve his plot of land near the forest. Vegetables grew well. Meat was brought in either by the forest cat or familiar anthropomorphs. Sometimes he turned in carcasses to the guild and could move on with his life in peace. Rumors about Kenichi swirled around the city like wind among the stalls. Some said he was bankrupt. Some claimed he was dead or gone. Some speculated, others recounted them with confidence as if they knew the truth. But Kenichi didn't react to it in any way. He didn't care. He did not seek to refute the speculation, nor did he try to explain anything. He had already settled into the new world and felt that there was no hurry. Gradually, he began to appear less and less often in Moreau's company. Even though she continued to make orders, he was losing interest in it. But there was a new occupation, calm, quiet, almost domestic. Primrose visited him more and more often. Sometimes they were short visits, other times long evenings. On one such day, she sat at the table, carefully tasting the dish he had just served. The smell of butter and potatoes filled the room, and the crunchy slices clicked pleasantly on her teeth. She squinted in pleasure as she listened to how it felt, and compared it to dishes she'd heard of before, like meat fried in oil, which was called carriage in the Empire. Kenichi was surprised that such a dish existed in this world as well. He wondered how deep the parallels with his homeland were here. The conversation gradually turned to more personal matters. Primura remembered that their family had only gotten the right to the family name because of Kenichi's idea, and she felt embarrassed. He only brushed it off. He really had enough of simple pleasures, food, comfort, peace. He didn't want fame, much less to reveal his name. Primura was embarrassed and lowered her gaze, remembering how they had laughed at the Draisen in the beginning. But now she understood how convenient it was, and she admitted that she had appreciated it only after she had tried it herself. It was already getting dark out the window. The shadows were getting longer, the air cooler. Primura was in no hurry to leave. Kenichi guessed she was going to stay the night again. He got up to get her a nightdress, and only then realized that her decision was final. The girl, embarrassed and determined at the same time, reminded him of the very transparent negligee he had shown her once. He pulled it out again, and for a moment he felt he had crossed a certain boundary. He noticed that if she took such a thing, her father would surely be angry. But Primura only nodded. She was no longer a child. At his cautious question if there was someone she wanted to impress, she blushed and admitted that she had already made up her mind. He was a little surprised, not expecting such candor. He motioned for her to sit down, but she was already seated, keeping her gaze on him. He turned away, feeling the inner tension, and remarked that girls like her had better be careful not to get attached to the likes of him. But Primrose suddenly explained that he was a wonderful man. This only made him sadder. He asked if a girl like her could not be sought after by the nobility. Kenichi listened attentively to Primura, who nodded, explaining that there were marriage proposals, but in the eyes of the nobility, a merchant's daughter could only be a kept woman, not a first wife. When Kenichi inquired about the knight who frequented his shop, Primura remembered him and said that it was probably a knight of the Nospole family, a man of good reputation. Kenichi then questioned what her father would say about it. She replied that he was fine with it. Kenichi realized that was a reasonable choice, though he suspected her father still wasn't in complete agreement. He apologized for bringing up such a serious topic and asked to leave it aside. considering it too much of a responsibility for him and wishing Primura would accept the rejection. The girl offered then at least to spend the night with him in the same bed, only to spend the night. He couldn't refuse, and soon they were lying together, snuggled against each other, with Primura breathing quietly in her sleep. As she left in the morning, Kenichi still couldn't understand why such a girl could find comfort in the company of a man like him. The problem was that he couldn't move faster, but it was possible to use Dan tactics. Jink remembered his past fight with the guild commander. Kenichi was surprised to find him in such a setting, and the knight explained that he had received word of a suspicious man living in the forest and had come to see if it was true. The knight wondered how Kenichi had managed to build a house in such a wild place. Pointing to the solar panels on the roof, he asked for an explanation. Kenichi recognized the solar panels, a technology that attracted attention. Kenichi explained that the technology was related to magic, and therefore he could not reveal details. The knight was stunned to realize that there was a mage in front of him, and Kenichi asked to keep the secret. The knight realized that if the details of his power became known, it could cause serious problems. In response, he offered to grant him one wish if he had the chance. Soon, perfectly smooth, shiny ingots of steel appeared in front of the knight, the surface of which seemed as if it had been sliced with a knife. Kenichi noticed that the knight was more pleased with the smooth, rectangular shape rather than the quality of the metal. He said he knew of the knight's preference for a long sword, but he didn't have one, so he offered to take the ingots and have them commissioned by a blacksmith to make a sword. The knight agreed without hesitation. When they returned to the house, Kenichi placed 2 mugs on the table, and with a sincere smile offered to talk over a cup of drink. The knight was only too glad for such an invitation. Kenichi pulled out a bottle of whiskey, and the knight noted that after a treat like that, you couldn't just walk away. He inquired what Kenichi would like to hear about. Kenichi smiled back, admitting that the knight had figured him out. Kenichi asked the knight about diplomatic relations in that country. The knight noted that the merchant was not only interested in domestic affairs, but also in neighboring nations. Kenichi explained that as war approaches, the range of goods changes. What can be bought or sold becomes more limited. The knight reflected and said that there were minor skirmishes with neighbors on the borders, but was confident that until internal conflicts were resolved, there would be no real war. Kenichi inquired as to what internal problems were in mind. The knight spoke of the power struggle between the empress and her eldest daughter. Despite the ties of kinship, the mother and the heiress are in conflict. Kenichi was surprised and asked if the mother and daughter were really feuding. The knight confirmed, adding that the empress wanted to hand over power to her younger daughter, and even tried to poison the older daughter, but failed. Since then, their bitter feud had begun. Kenichi was shocked to hear this, amazed at how close people were willing to kill each other for power. He asked how long this conflict could take. The knight replied that he did not think it was a long process. Since the first princess has enlisted the support of a powerful mage with a unique magical power that gives her an advantage over her mother. Kenichi wondered about the nature of this power. It was different from ordinary magic. It required no sacrifice and could be used indefinitely. He wondered if Shangri-La's magic was just such a special power. The knight tried to recall the name of this magic, saying that it was yellow in color and began with Mayo. Kenichi thought that it might be referring to Mayo. The knight smiled and confirmed the guess by calling the magic exactly that, Mayo. He told the legend of how the magician summoned a wave of oil, doused the monsters, and burned them to the ground. Kenichi initially thought it was a joke, but realized that with large quantities, mayonnaise could be used as a serious weapon, which only confirmed the idea that he was the one who had come from another world. Kenichi inquired about the full name of the empire, and the knight informed him that the country was called the Young Maiden Empire. According to tradition, When the Empress ascends the throne, she takes the form of a young girl using the treasures of the gods and rules as such. Kenichi thought this tradition was naive and childish. However, he himself did not wish for war. The knight had come to check if the suspicious man in the forest was one of the bandits. Now he was determined to tell everyone that a strange uncle he knew lived in the forest. It had been exactly a month since the last time Kenichi had looked at Primura, and there had been no sign of her since. Later, he learned that the Maru Trading Company had left on a caravan to make a long-distance purchase. It was today that the caravan was scheduled to return back to the city. The thought that something unusual might be brought along with the return never left Kenichi's mind, and he decided to walk through the center of the city to see for himself. Suddenly, alarmed cries could be heard among the crowd. Someone was loudly begging for help, demanding that his daughter be saved. Kenichi quickly made his way to the source of the noise, and saw an acquaintance, Maru himself, begging for help and promising any money. The man was on his knees, almost crying, desperately explaining that their caravan had been attacked by bandits. When everyone was completely robbed, Primura had no time to escape and was left in the hands of her attackers. People standing nearby said that Moreau tried to return to his daughter, but was dragged away by force. No one knew what condition the others were in, or how far the bandits from Shaga's group were willing to go. Moreau lowered his hands to the ground, his voice trembling. He begged for help again and promised to pay any amount of money to whoever would save Primrose. Gloomy thoughts ran through Kenichi's mind. This gang is known for its brutality, burning villages to the ground. The leader of the gang, numbering over 50, was on the board of criminals, and those around him realized the chances of saving the girl were slim. Kenichi stood next to Maru, and Primura's smiling face, her lively gaze, easy smile, and unwavering determination vividly surfaced in his memory. At this tense moment, Kenichi suddenly turned sternly to Maru with a firm statement that he would definitely handle the situation. All eyes turned to him. Stunned by his determination, many couldn't believe their eyes. Kenichi himself realized that it looked like madness. He had never commanded an army and was a complete novice at this sort of thing. He realized that those around him probably doubted that he was capable of doing anything meaningful. But inside, he was sure that if he didn't take action now, he would regret it for the rest of his life. Especially now that he had access to Shangri-La, an incredible resource that could be the key to salvation. Kenichi explained to Moreau that they needed money for training and promised to pay him back later. To convince his partner, he firmly asked him to trust him. Soon the boys reached the upper floors, where they met the orcs and defeated them. They took a break, ate, and reached the meadows where the ants lived. Looking back at his account, he saw exactly 50 gold coins, the equivalent of 10 million yen. Knowing that the bandits' base was 30 leagues away, about 50 kilometers from here, he knew there was a long way to go, requiring strong legs. Upon reflection, he thought about horses, but soon decided to look for suitable transportation on Shangri-La, for there were no other options left. At this point, he started looking for a truck, powerful, off-road, capable of carrying 20 to 30 people, with 4WD four-wheel drive. Finally, he found exactly what he was looking for. Kenichi loudly warned everyone around him that he was about to use summoning magic and something big would appear. Everyone needed to stand back. The crowd was stunned and whispers filled the air. People were dumbfounded by the information that he was a mage. Muro looked at Kenichi carefully and asked what he was going to do. In response, Kenichi pressed the buy button and a diesel-powered, four-wheel drive truck worth 2,400,000 yen appeared right in front of their eyes. People were stunned, not realizing exactly what they were seeing. Kenichi calmed everyone down, explaining that everything was under control and this vehicle obeyed only him. He explained that it was a vehicle that could drive without horses, an incredible marvel of engineering and magic at the same time. No one could believe what was happening. When Kenichi got behind the wheel and started the engine, the truck started smoothly and steadily, confirming that it was indeed capable of traveling without horses, magic backed by technology. Kenichi smiled quietly, thinking that he was lucky to have AC license in the past world, a knowledge that unexpectedly came in handy in this alien world. Kenichi firmly stated that he would drive his truck to the bandits' base to bring anyone who was willing to fight. He promised to provide them with weapons and shields, and there would be a large bounty on the head of the gang leader, Shag. Nina mentioned the head of the Dan Guild as well. She suggested that he could have been a traitor as well. The hero asked that they not let their enemies know that they knew of the impending assassination attempt. They needed to behave as normal. Ian and Esther certainly understood him, but with Nina, it was different. Kenichi explained that the bow takes time to draw the bowstring, so you can't shoot in quick succession, but the power of the shot is great. Mare nodded, accepting the explanation. Soon the other beastmen, friends of Mare, joined them and asked if they would get weapons. Kenichi acquired a saber, battle axe, and crossbow for them, handing them each one. The beastmen were delighted, noting that it was far better than the army crossbows, and the thin but sturdy blade would be deadly in battle. Kenichi realized that these were born fighters, and those who met them in battle would be in great danger. They amicably stated that they were willing to fight and earn, and urged that they be taken into the squad. At this point, someone nearby declared that he would also go with them. A knight approached them, his appearance instilling confidence. Kenichi realized that with him, the team's chances would increase significantly. The knight proudly announced that his wolf fang sword was finally ready. Kenichi scrutinized the massive black blade with a perfectly polished surface, forged from steel that had recently been provided by Kenichi himself. The knight was anticipating the hunt for Shag and was ready to test the sword in battle, sprinkling it with the blood of his enemies. Kenichi thought with a smile that this man too had gone slightly insane, so fervent was his desire for justice. At that moment, the old man from the hardware store, the one everyone knew as calm and kind, joined the company. He stated that he would not stay away and wanted to help. Kenichi asked with a slight smile if it was too late for such a feat, but the old man replied that he had been an adventurer in the past. To prove his words, he held out his hand, and fire erupted on the ground. Kenichi was dumbfounded. The grandfather turned out to be a real mage, though long retired from the martial arts. The old man said that magic could come in handy in battle. At that moment, Anama approached them, expressing her displeasure at not being invited to join the squad. Kenichi affectionately helped her into the truck, explaining that they were on their way to fight. Anama promised to take care of the food preparation, but honestly admitted that she would prefer to flee at the first danger, and that was her firm promise. Thus a team of 8 adventurers was formed. Considering that Shag's gang had over 50 men, their chances were slim. Kenichi issued more crossbows and machetes, so that everyone would be armed. He warned that it was impossible to attack head-on. It was better to act suddenly, such as making a night sortie. Only then would there be a chance of success. Later, Kenichi and Mary went to the guild to hand in the official assignment to destroy Shaga's gang. There were no adventure ranks in this world, so one could take any assignment. Kenichi realized that if they did well, he would receive a handsome reward from the guild, Maru's company, and the government, but only if he returned alive. Zink wrote a letter for the king at the desk in his study and said it was ready. He looked at the box behind him and picked it up. Kenichi approached Maru with one important request. Maru listened to him carefully and immediately asked how he could help. Kenichi explained that he needed armor for an upcoming mission. Moreau did not hesitate to assure him that Kenichi could take as much armor as he needed and the company would cover the cost. Although Kenichi had tried to find suitable armor and chain mail on Shangri-La, there was nothing to meet the adventurers' requirements. Everything needed was purchased and paid for by the Maru Trading Company, making it possible to purchase equipment for the entire group, including Kenichi himself. He chose the lightest leather armor he could find, comfortable and unrestrictive. At this time, Kenichi noticed one of the beast men scrutinizing the shield. The one assured him that he could give him a better shield, so no purchase was necessary. As he got closer, the beastman asked if his shield was like an unbending saber with magical effects. He nodded in response and said it was roughly that, though he couldn't show any magical features here and now, but it would become apparent when they left the city. Of course, that wasn't entirely true, more like a deception. Kenichi also assured everyone that he would be preparing food for the group, so there was no need to worry about food. All the necessary food was already in the inventory. The knight was already excited for the upcoming sortie. He was pleased to note that even in hiking conditions, a tasty meal could boost his mood and morale. After all, camp food was usually boring and unpalatable. When everyone was ready, Kenichi got behind the wheel of the 4-ton truck and they drove out of the city gates. It was time to hit the road. 15 adventurers and 1 woman were housed in a massive 4-ton truck laden with weapons and armor. After a hearty lunch, they were seen off by the assembled residents, some with hope, others with sneers and derision. He could only curse the boys for their delicious stew. Esther smiled and told Mina that it was as delicious as ever. While everyone ate their portions quietly, Nina looked at Dan sympathetically. The hero thought it was time for them to go and asked Dan if he liked surprises. Dan thought that God himself had condescended to him, since he wanted to give him a surprise. They left Dalia, heading toward the abandoned castle where the bandits had set up their base. The distance was considerable, about 50 kilometers. According to rumors, there were 50 people in the gang who spared no one. Several members of the caravan had already fallen victim to this brutal group, and Primura's fate remained a mystery. Kenichi deliberately avoided gloomy thoughts, realizing that it was more important to concentrate on the rescue now. Anama, sitting next to him, still marveled. She didn't understand how a truck without horses could go so fast and smoothly. She admitted that she didn't expect such power and skill, because at that speed in a wagon, one could easily crash. Kenichi noticed that Anama sincerely believed in the magical nature of what was happening, and admitted that it was that belief that gave them strength. He announced that they would set up a camp along the way to rest and recover. Soon they were settled on the ground and Kenichi set about preparing a simple but nutritious lunch: tomato soup with mashed potatoes and a fresh loaf. Everyone ate with gusto, noting that despite the bright red color of the soup, it was vegetable and rich with rabbit meat, which had a distinctive flavor. Kenichi remarked with a smile that since his companions could taste it immediately, it meant that the rabbit was particularly flavorful, since he thought that horned hares didn't have a strong odor. The man happily confirmed his words. One of the beast men remarked that Kenichi's food was always excellent, and Mare eagerly supported his opinion. The elder who was watching them also tasted the soup and was so impressed by the flavor that he was speechless for a moment. Dan was almost dying of cold and asked the Zinc to summon a monster as soon as possible. The flames of the campfire illuminated their camp, and Kenichi carefully drew a map in the sand. It was about 10 kilometers to the base of Shaga's gang. He explained that their opponents would be 50 armed bandits, and a clear plan of attack was now necessary. Anama suggested striking while the enemies were sleeping, which Kenichi approved, but warned that approaching by truck would wake the bandits. Kenichi asked if the castle had a gate that could be an obstacle in the way. Someone in the group suggested that the old castle should probably have a massive gate that would have to be overcome. Grandfather, an experienced mage, confidently stated that he would take on the task. Kenichi asked if he could use magic to tear down the gate, to which he received an answer that almost hinted at a powerful explosion, but the mage wouldn't give any details. Kenichi thought it might be better to attack not while the bandits were asleep, but when they were drunk and less collected. The knight supported the idea. He explained that alcohol slows reaction time and reduces the organization of the fighters, and added that the bandits would dine without armor. In this world, the evening meal was always accompanied by alcoholic beverages, and, accordingly, intoxication would set in about 2 hours after the start of the meal. They decided to take advantage of this moment to attack. Kenichi approached Mare and handed her a radio receiver, a special device that allowed them to communicate at a distance. He showed her which button to press to transmit voice messages, and instructed her to keep a close eye on the enemy's movements. In case the signalers appeared, Mare was to eliminate them discreetly. The specialty of the beast men was their night vision and dark fur, making them blend in easily with their surroundings in the dark. Then, when Mare had already climbed the tree, he checked the communication through the radio receiver, and she happily reported that she could hear him just fine. Kenichi explained that it was all that magic. At this point, his grandfather approached him, noting that not even imperial mages had such magical devices. Kenichi smilingly asked the old man not to spread such details, considering that a truckload of technology had already been shown. Remembering his promise, Kenichi took out 5 lightweight polycarbonate armor shields worth about 200,000 yen. Despite their thin structure, the shields were very strong and would not break under normal impacts. Although the cost was considerable, Kenichi hoped it would help them in their upcoming battle with the Shaga bandits. He offered to take the knight's shield, but he politely declined. The rest of the beastmen took shields that were slightly smaller and lighter for ease of movement, were required a great deal of expenditure. Kenichi had purchased a laser pointer for himself that could be attached to a pneumatic crossbow. Fighting in the dark was going to be extremely difficult, and such precise aiming would be extremely useful. At close range, pointing the pointer at a target would guarantee a hit. Realizing that the locals were unlikely to get used to this technology quickly, he decided to keep it to himself only. Turning to Anama, Kenichi reminded her that they were counting on her help. Anama firmly assured that she had memorized everything and would not forget. She reiterated that if the group didn't return within 24 hours, she would have to inform the guild in town that the mission had failed. At the same time, she admitted that she didn't like reporting to government authorities, but she was obligated to fulfill her promise. As the truck began to slowly pull away, she strictly ordered them to be sure to return alive, and their task became even more personal and important. When they arrived at the castle gates, it was already late at night. Kenichi spoke to Mare on the radio and asked her to report the situation. She reported that the castle was surrounded by a strong stone wall, with a large wooden gate at the entrance. Kenichi asked if there were guards, and Mare replied that there was a watchtower on top of the wall with several men on duty. Hearing voices inside, she added that judging by them, the castle was full of people. Kenichi clearly realized that there was a difficult challenge ahead. There were many enemies, and the castle was fortified with sturdy walls and watchtowers. He turned to the knight and said with determination that he could not wait any longer. It was time to act. The knight nodded silently, ready to fight. At that moment, one of the beast men approached Kenichi. He handed him a strange nut. Kenichi was confused, not knowing what to do with it, but his grandfather suggested that it was a special item to bite into before battle, especially for newcomers. Hesitantly putting the cookie in his mouth, Kenichi immediately started spitting. The taste was faintly bitter, his tongue went numb, and his speech was lost. He was reassured the effect would soon wear off and help them see in the dark. Indeed, a moment later the night darkness disappeared and everything around him became bright and clear, as if under the light of a spotlight. Kenichi couldn't help but laugh. The sensation was unusual, almost like being under the influence of some forbidden substance. The knight warned with a smile that it was possible to overdo it, but you'd have to be truly reckless to do so. Kenichi finally realized that the nut was indeed a substance. Deciding that further doubts were unnecessary, they all gathered and made the decision to move forward. In a cheerful and uplifted mood, the truck set off. Kenichi warned Mare through the radio that they were starting to move and she should be alert. Mare confirmed that she would keep a close watch and eliminate any signalers. As they approached the tower, Kenichi's mood became lighter, almost cheerful. He couldn't help but smile. As they approached the gate, Kenichi loudly ordered his grandfather to prepare for the magical blast. The old man began to recite the words of the spell. He summoned the power of a dying soul, and at that moment, a powerful explosion blew the castle gates apart. Everyone present was amazed by the power of magic and wondered if Grandpa could repeat this trick, but he replied that today it was the limit of his abilities. They drove straight into the castle without delay, and the bandits, taken by surprise, were seized with terror and confusion. No one had expected such a swift attack. Kenichi gave the command to open fire, and arrows whipped at the enemies. The bandits rushed forward, screaming for revenge and murder, but the beastmen had already sprung from their hiding place, fearlessly slashing their enemies one by one. With a predatory smile, the knight drew his sword, his wolf thawing as if revitalized by bloodlust. He easily sliced through the bandit who had already swung at him. He then smeared the fresh blood on his face, once again marveling at the quality of the weapon. Kenichi noticed how the knight had transformed into a formidable and fearsome fighter, and the beastmen were no less ruthless, seeming quite capable of overpowering the enemy. There was an unbelievable amount of them, so the boys set about collecting them. As they gathered them, Ike's believed that with so many of them, he might get one too. With the roar of the machine and the rumble of the bucket, he began to scatter the enemies like a sack of straw, causing them to panic. Everyone around them screamed in terror, calling Kenichi a monster, and ran, begging for help. Kenichi, perplexed, asked what they were muttering and where Primura was. Suddenly a shrill, high-pitched voice sounded, and he realized it wasn't just Primura who was being held captive, but the other girls as well. He urgently ordered all the girls to take cover. At that moment a man came up the tower, holding a girl tightly in one hand. He made everyone take notice. It was Shada, the cruel leader of the gang. He mockingly said that he didn't expect to see rescuers, and even with a mage who controls monsters, and that it was time to lay down their weapons. The dagger he held over Primrose Sen glittered in the light, and his smile was sinister and cold. Kenichi saw Primura and couldn't hold back a scream. He demanded to let her go immediately. Primura, noticing him, was also loudly outraged, not hiding her fear and anger. Shada, holding her with one hand, mockingly declared that they should be the ones to lay down their weapons, for her life was in his hands. Those words sounded like they were from a classic villain script, and Kenichi realized their sinister reality. Although heroic thoughts flashed through his mind, he felt that because of the action of that strange nut, he had lost his usual sense of fear. Kenichi felt like he was in the plot of some suspenseful TV series. Everything that was happening seemed unbelievable and surreal. But despite that, he firmly realized that he had to save Primura at any cost. The gang leader, raising his voice, once again ordered his men to stop talking and lay down their weapons. His hand suddenly touched Primura's. With a sharp movement, he tore off her clothes. Kenichi couldn't stand it and shouted, demanding that this arbitrary behavior stop. Shada scornfully called him a brat and said that if he had known, he wouldn't have listened to him and would have played with Primura to his heart's content. Kenichi thought about what Shada had said about the nobles. Perhaps there was an important detail that could not be missed. He immediately contacted Mare on the radio, asking if she could hear him. Kenichi, using a laser pointer, aimed the red dot directly at the gang leader's body, watching Mare's reaction carefully. He asked if she could see the mark on the enemy. Kenichi explained that the beam would help blind the enemy in the eye, after which she should fire her bow. After receiving her confirmation of readiness, Kenichi carefully aimed the beam at the enemy's eye. The ringleader cried out, letting go of Primura and clutching his blinded eye. Mare drew the bowstring, focusing on the red dot that Kenichi aimed at the ringleader's eye. At that moment, Kenichi signaled Mare, and she released an arrow that pierced the ringleader's head through and through. Seeing the fall of their leader, the bandits were horrified and arrows flew in all directions, piercing the bodies of their enemies. When the battle was over and all the foes were defeated, the beastmen cheered their victory. They were anticipating their well-deserved reward. The knight, however, warned against premature relaxation, noting the presence of the wounded. The elder, applying magical knowledge, began to treat the injured. Kenichi approached him with a question about his ability to heal, to which he received the answer that help was possible, but not for forest cats. The beastman circled the area and reported hearing only the girls crying, no other signs of danger. Nevertheless, according to the knight, vigilance must be maintained. At that moment, Kenichi's gaze fell on Primura. The girl ran up and hugged him tightly with tears in her eyes. He wondered if she was okay. Kenichi's emotions were bubbling inside. He felt like he was about to explode from the overwhelming feelings, but mentally urged himself to stay calm. He took one of the cloaks and covered the girl. Then, pointing to the body of the defeated enemy, Kenichi asked Primura if it was really the leader of the Shada gang. She looked at him, nodded, and confirmed that that was what the other gangsters had called him. Kenichi turned to the knight carefully, reminding him that Shada had mentioned something important, connections to the nobility. The knight nodded, remembering the bandit talking about patrons from the higher circles. Kenichi added that it was someone from the nobility who paid for the kidnappings. The knight asked what exactly he meant by that, and upon hearing the confirmation, noted with dismay that it boded only trouble. Though he guessed there were corrupt ones, the depth of the conspiracy astounded him. Kenichi realized that Shada had kidnapped a girl known throughout the city to turn her into a slave and rampage over her. He asked the knight to investigate the bandit base, find evidence and identify the culprits, for he was a true expert in matters of nobility. The knight confirmed that he would take the case. Mare suddenly ran up to Kenichi, calling out to him and pointing to a group of girls nearby. She informed him that these captives had been stolen by bandits from different villages, and almost all of them had been found naked, which spoke of the terrible ordeal they had gone through. Kenichi immediately realized that leaving them in such a state was not an option. He quickly bought 20 warm blankets and instructed Mare to distribute them to the girls so they could take shelter and keep warm. Kenichi then addressed the captives, announcing that they had come from Dalia to finish off Shada's bandit gang, but would not harm any of the girls. Those who wished to return home were promised a safe way back. The girls cried with relief and hope, asking if he was joking. However, only 9 decided to return to their homeland. The rest chose to stay in the city, hoping for a new life and safety. One of the girls suddenly approached Kenichi with a request. She explained that they hadn't bathed in a while and wanted to use the well nearby. Kenichi gave them lamps and soap, allowing them to do whatever they needed to do. He bought 20 sets of light clothing, simple dresses and skirts that were immediately admired. Primura quietly approached and whispered that she too wanted such a dress, and her wish was heard. Suddenly, Mare called out to Kenichi again, pointing to a small child, disheveled, dirty, and clearly in need of help. Kenichi motioned to Primura to help the child clean up and handed her a pair of scissors, an item unknown in this world. Primura didn't realize what it was. But then, when she saw Kenichi demonstrate on the child's hair that it could be used to cut hair, she marveled and asked if such scissors could be sold in their stores. Kenichi was surprised to realize that even simple things like that didn't exist in this world. He felt awkward looking at the girls around him and thought about Primura, how heavy the responsibility of a merchant's daughter who should never forget her father's company. The girls whispered quietly, discussing the fact that Primura had approached Kenichi without her clothes on, and whether it should be embarrassing. Primura quickly turned away. Kenichi, watching this, thought that he could rely on her in matters with the girls. Suddenly, Kenichi's gaze fell on the mountain of bodies of the defeated bandits. The bodies spread out in front of Kenichi. The signs of the brutality of this world were evident. Despite the effects of the substances, he clearly realized it couldn't go on like this, especially since those who had suffered from it were more seriously injured than the others. Suddenly, his gaze fell on one of the beast men, who was grabbing the defeated Shag by the hair. Kenichi walked over and asked what the man was doing. But the beast man didn't immediately understand the meaning of the question. He explained that they needed to provide the ringleader's head as evidence, because a generous reward was promised for his capture. In addition, in order to convince the guild, they should identify all the bandits in person. For Kenichi, this was the first time he had ever done this, but for the adventurers, it was commonplace. Kenichi realized with a heavy feeling how cruel this other world was. He took a step outside the city and paused for a moment, as if trying to digest everything that had happened. He offered to put the heads of the defeated into the inventory. Kenichi explained that they would give off a foul odor over time, and that it was inconvenient to carry them by hand. Corpses don't rot or stink in the inventory. Kenichi couldn't get used to the idea of having to deal with such things. He didn't understand where the life he dreamed of was. A notification appeared in his inventory, 52 human heads. He couldn't understand how things had turned out this way, how fate had thrown him into these events. At that moment, one of the girls called out to him. All of them had already changed into their new clothes, and Kenichi was surprised to notice how they all looked good in them. The girl admitted that she was uncomfortable accepting such gifts, but Kenichi smilingly asked them not to worry. When they washed and cut the baby's hair, it turned out to be a girl. Kenichi bought her a small baby dress and held it out for her to put on. The girl looked at it shyly, not knowing how to handle it. Kenichi realized that the girl didn't know how to dress properly and asked one of the girls to help her. The one with care came over and carefully helped her put on her dress. Kenichi smilingly noticed that she looked good in her new clothes and asked her what her name was. The girl quietly replied that her name was Buttercup. Kenichi smiled warmly and said that it was a lovely name and he was very pleased to meet her. Meanwhile, the beast men were fully immersed in their search for the treasure left behind by the bandits. It was already starting to get evening, and everyone decided to stop for the night. Kenichi and the girls settled down on the ground, covering themselves with warm blankets. Buttercup laid down next to Kenichi, and he felt relieved. It seemed that everything was finally resolved, and now they had a chance to return to Dalia safely. Kenichi and his team were victorious. Shaga's gang was completely destroyed, and the kidnapped Primura was rescued. It was early morning, and the first rays of sunlight illuminated the castle that had been turned into a battlefield. A huge mountain stood in the center of the courtyard. The beast men had collected armor, weapons, and many valuable items from their defeated enemies. Kenichi walked over and examined the pile carefully, marveling at the variety of trophies. He wondered if they could carry it all with them. One of the beastmen noted proudly that all this cargo could be sold profitably, and it would be a pity to leave such riches behind. However, Kenichi realized that the truck they had arrived in would be packed to the brim with the girls they had rescued, so it would be physically impossible to take everything at once. The other beastman pointed out the remaining treasures in the castle, hidden in dark corners and warehouses. None of them wanted to miss the chance to take anything of value with them. Realizing the situation, Kenichi decided to use the inventory. The beastmen didn't doubt his skill with this marvel. After instructing a few of the young men to fish in a nearby stream, Kenichi began to prepare breakfast himself. The vegetables were to be taken from the garden behind the castle, and one of the girls offered to help. Kenichi gratefully accepted the offer. He concentrated on preparing the meat, deciding that after a hard fight, they deserved a real feast, without trifles and economy. Soon there was the smell of fresh vegetables and the smoke of roasting meat in the air. The girls were actively helping, bringing ingredients and keeping the kitchen in order. Still, Kenichi felt a slight uneasiness, as if he had forgotten something important. Suddenly, a knight approached him, looking somewhat tired after his rounds of the castle. He handed Kenichi a letter found among the bandits' belongings. The envelope had a bright red sealing wax on it, symbolizing a connection to the influential nobles. Kenichi realized that these people either overestimated their safety or trusted the secret too much. The knight explained that if the nobles had warned them of a possible attack, the bandits would have left the castle long ago. That meant that they either didn't expect a strike, or someone had deliberately left them in the dark. Kenichi decided to have the knight investigate the matter. Looking up at the clear sky, Kenichi suddenly felt like he was missing something important. His thoughts were interrupted by a loud scream. Anama came running over to them, her face wet with tears, but joy and relief burning in them. She immediately hugged Primura, expressing immense happiness that she was alive and well as gratitude to Kenichi and his team. Anama couldn't believe they had returned from their mission so quickly. Primura silently looked at Kenichi with quiet gratitude. Her rescue seemed like a miracle. Anama felt genuinely surprised that Kenichi and his team had returned so quickly, having barely had time to leave their domain. Kenichi recalled that his horseless transport had a speed comparable to that of beastmen on foot, which was an undeniable fact. Anama lowered her gaze to the little girl standing nearby and gently ran her hand over her head, quietly musing that if her own daughter were alive, she would be the same age as this little girl. Kenichi wondered if Anama had children, and received an affirmative answer. The woman told him that her daughter had died in an epidemic, and the girl herself was the product of a single night spent with a man 10 years ago. In this harsh world, medicine remained low and child mortality was, alas, high. At this time, there were cheers of admiration around the tables of prepared food. Kenichi's dishes were once again magnificent. He modestly mentioned that the girls had helped with the preparation, but they were quick to point out that they had only peeled the vegetables, and that he had done all the work. One of the girls remarked that the rolls were unusually soft and tasty, so much so that even the soup seemed like an optional extra. In this world, bread was usually very hard, and they used to dip it in soup to make it edible, but today's meal was amazing in its flavor. Anama, sitting next to the baby, continued to stroke her head with care, encouraging her to eat and not neglecting her. It was as if the memories of the dead child had come alive in her, and without noticing it, she was taking care of Buttercup, who did not look displeased and seemed to be gradually accepting her new family. After breakfast, the men set to work again, beginning to carefully clear the castle, and even going to dig up vegetables from the vegetable garden to take with them. Kenichi fit a huge load into his inventory and wondered how much more could fit in it. At that moment, an elder approached him, warning that if word got out about such a huge inventory, Kenichi could be in serious trouble. The man assured that if the elder remained silent, the secret would remain safe. However, the elder parried that no one was capable of silencing a person, but he wasn't going to talk about it himself. Kenichi remembered with a smile that, as they said in the past world, no one is capable of making someone keep their mouths shut, but realized that there was no turning back time. He decided to take advantage of opportunities while they were available, and in case of danger, flee. With that, Kenichi announced his readiness to move out. He began by taking the 9 girls to their home villages. Kenichi looked at Buttercup carefully and asked what village she was from. The girl replied that her homeland was Europe. One of the companions remarked that it was very far away. Kenichi then clarified the distance and was told that it was about 70 leagues, which was approximately 120 kilometers. He turned his eyes back to Buttercup and informed her that if she wanted to go home, he would be happy to drive her. However, the girl shook her head negatively, refusing the offer. Anama walked over and hugged her, suggesting that the girl had probably been sold due to lack of money in the family. Buttercup was silent, not denying it, and Anama was apparently right. Her parents had given her to the merchants, and they in turn had lost her when the bandits took her away. That was why she was here, among the rescued. Kenichi looked at Anama and made it clear that now it was time to take the girls to their homes, and that there was no time for regrets and tears. Anama acquiesced, realizing the need to move forward immediately. Kenichi then got down to Buttercup's level and asked if she was going to go with the others to Dalia. The girl cried, but didn't say a word, leaving her choice unspoken. Kenichi understood her silence as agreement and decided it was time to hit the road. The roads between towns and villages seemed endless, and the rugged terrain left no hope of relief anytime soon. Nevertheless, they left the castle and began their journey along winding paths, heading for new places. Before leaving the castle, Kenichi decided to send one of the anthropomorphs to the town to notify the guild and residents of the victory over the bandits. This bought time and allowed him to quietly travel around the villages, dropping off the rescued girls at their homes. As they approached the town, one by one the girls asked to be dropped off farther away from the village, wanting to continue their former lives without the attention. Kenichi handed out a gold coin to each, expecting to provide them with funds for 2 months of living. Anama noticed Kenichi's unexpected generosity, to which he replied that these girls had suffered at the hands of bandits and deserved support. He had never heard of anyone doing that, though. Anama assumed that he would be treated as a hero in Dalia, but Kenichi asked not to be flattered, not considering himself worthy of such fame. Primura remarked that it suited him, since his motivation wasn't fame. Kenichi sincerely admitted that his main goal was to live a quiet and simple life without excesses. Primura watched him carefully, smiling without words, as if understanding his inner turmoil. His thoughts flickered as he wondered why events had taken such an unexpected turn. Soon the massive city gates appeared in the distance, and it was clear to everyone they were already approaching Dalia. At that moment, Mr. Moreau jumped out of the gate, seeing his daughter. His voice pierced the air, expressing joy and relief as she ran up to him and hugged him. A crowd of residents gathered around, sharing in the happiness of saving the head of the company's daughter. Kenichi got out of the truck, smiling as he watched the scene. One of the anthropomorphs climbed onto the roof of the truck and loudly proclaimed victory over Shaga and his gang of bandits, causing those who were mocking them to come outside. However, the people continued to laugh and doubt, believing that Kenichi and his crew could have simply evaded pursuit and were just lucky to be alive. Then the anthropomorph demandingly called out to Kenichi to show him Shaga's head. Kenichi retrieved the severed head from his inventory and handed it over. Raising it high above the crowd, the anthropomorph turned to the people asking what they would say now. The people instantly changed their minds, noticing the distinctive scar on the head, the same one that had been depicted on the wanted posters. They realized that Kenichi had indeed emerged victorious. However, the matter didn't end there. The Adventurers Guild had to be notified, and the results formalized. The bandits' heads were placed on the table at the counter, where one of the girls shuddered in horror. Kenichi explained that the head of Shaga, the leader of the gang, was in front of them, and anyone could examine it as much as they wanted. However, they were asked not to place the gruesome trophy directly on the table, so as not to ruin the furniture. When one of the attendees asked how many of these heads there were in total, Kenichi replied that there were 52, and it would take all night to inspect. At that moment, a knight came out of the crowd, introducing himself as No Spole, and announced that he wished to see the head of the guild. He was asked to wait a bit, and the knight turned his gaze to Kenichi and spoke of his upcoming meeting with Count Asclepius the very next day. Kenichi asked if he would tell the Count about the noble's ties to the bandits, and the knight nodded in agreement. Kenichi then noted that they had hopes for him, as it was difficult for ordinary people to talk to the upper class. The knight confirmed that they could rely on him. At this time, the guild workers began to scrutinize the heads. They checked the features against the descriptions of the gang members from the advertisements, since there were no photos in their world. It often happened that the amount of the reward was changed for personal reasons, causing the anthropomorph Nyakero to disdain the guild. However, due to the knight's presence and his noble background, respect for the guild was high enough that the process went smoothly. After scrutinizing all the goals, Kenichi's team was rewarded with 1,750 gold coins, which equaled 345 million yen, an average of 115 coins each, which was approximately 23 million yen. In addition, the proceeds from the sale of the bandits' property were also to be divided equally. For organizing and cooking, the 14 people decided to thank Kenichi by collecting 80 gold coins for him, about 160 million yen. Money in any form was important to him. Approaching Anama, Kenichi asked if 5 gold coins would be enough for her. She refused, believing she had done nothing meaningful. However, Kenichi reminded her that she had helped. He pressed her to take at least 1 coin, to which the woman hesitated and admitted that she had cooked the food after all. Hugging Buttercup, she said she intended to take care of the child as well, so she would take the reward. The other girls, who had come with them, were also handed out 1 gold coin each. They could hardly believe such generosity. Kenichi explained that they needed the money to find shelter and work, so it would be wrong to refuse. In case of any difficulties, the girls could turn to either Anama or their grandfather, and Anama nodded in support, assuring them that it wouldn't be a problem. The realization settled in Kenichi's mind that he had only recently found himself in this city, and more generally, in this world. Primura also returned home safely. Meanwhile, the city gates were closing, and it was time to look for a place to stay for the night. Upon returning to the inn, Kenichi was greeted by Azalea, who excitedly shouted that she had heard that someone very much like him had wiped out a gang of bandits, and wondered if that was really the case. Kenichi brushed it off, stating that it was someone else. It was a lie, of course, but he was well aware that if everyone in the inn found out about his large sum of money, with him, he would have a hard time hiding his position. Azalea stepped closer and reminded him of her promise to become his mistress. Kenichi pretended not to remember that, though he guessed she realized that he was now flush with money. Disappointed, Azalea turned away and admitted that she was just a toy for him. He noticed that her tears were insincere. Apologizing, Kenichi offered to let her keep the change. Suddenly, Azalea admitted that she wouldn't make it through the month without money and asked that he give her at least some. Despite being tired, Kenichi asked if he would have to pay extra again. At that moment, Azalea suddenly froze. Kenichi watched carefully and asked what happened to Azalea. At that moment, he noticed little Buttercup tugging her skirt gently, causing everyone present to gasp in surprise. After a noisy and tense night following the defeat of the bandit gang, Kenichi and his team returned to the city. Everyone reconvened at the Adventurers Guild to sort through the loot, treasure, and trophies that had been wrested from the hands of the outlaws. The decision was made to sell the weapons and armor at the same store where they had once purchased their gear. Upon entering the store and asking if they would buy the weapons from them, the salesman immediately agreed. However, when Kenichi embarrassedly pointed at the huge mountain of trophies, his surprise was unbounded. After calculating the approximate value of the equipment taken from one bandit, about 150,000 yen, and multiplying it by the number 52, they received an impressive sum of 7,800,000 yen. It was rumored that many merchants had increased their capital in this way, and the arms market had grown to its present size thanks to these transactions. It was decided to sell especially valuable items that Shaga had collected, such as carpets, ceramic and decorative swords, to the Maru Company, given that the nobility and the rich were eager to acquire such rarities. The furniture found in the den was left in the grandfather's hardware store, and the 100 gold coins obtained from the bandits were divided among all those present. From the sale, the team received a total of 178 gold coins, roughly equal to 35,600,000 yen. Dividing the amount into 15 people, each person received 11 gold coins, about 2,200,000 yen. Kenichi decided to give the remainder to the girls, believing it to be a fair and right decision. Since the main reward from the guild was still to be given out, Kenichi suggested that the whole team gather a little later. The girls were already able to find their own lodging and jobs, so he decided to return to his home. On his way through the streets of the city, he suddenly felt someone running up behind him. Buttercup was next to Kenichi, and he turned around, curious as to why she was following him. The girl was shyly silent, hesitant to answer right away. She had followed him to the inn yesterday and stayed there overnight, and in the morning she was following him again. Kenichi had spent a long time trying to figure out what she wanted until she quietly admitted that she wanted to be with him. He wondered if she'd rather stay with Anama, but Buttercup explained that Kenichi's food was especially good, and that's why she wanted to be around him. Kenichi realized that now Buttercup wasn't going anywhere, and there was no getting rid of her. He asked the girl if she had heard that he lived in the forest. Buttercup nodded, listening attentively. Kenichi explained that the forest was home to magical wolves and various insects, and she nodded again. He warned that he wouldn't be able to watch her all the time, but the girl was determined and agreed. When Kenichi mentioned that there were snakes in the forest, Buttercup didn't back down and still agreed. Then he realized that he saw no reason to refuse her and decided that he would live in the forest with her. As they approached the house, Kenichi announced that they had arrived, and the girl, seeing the wooden house among the greenery, marveled at its beauty. Suddenly, a forest cat jumped out from behind the bushes, proudly carrying a prey mouse in its teeth. The girl flinched in surprise and immediately hid behind Kenichi's back, as if seeking protection. Kenichi knelt down and stroked the animal affectionately, trying to calm both the cat and the girl. Despite her fear, she admitted she was scared, but Kenichi explained that this cat wasn't aggressive at all and wouldn't hurt her, offering to try stroking it. Reluctantly, but with interest, the girl reached out and ran her fingers through the soft fur of the animal, feeling warm and cozy. As they entered the house, Kenichi reminded her that since Buttercup would be living here, A bed would need to be taken care of. The girl raised her eyebrows in surprise, and he asked if she wanted her own place to sleep and where she would prefer to sleep. Suddenly, Buttercup announced that she would sleep together with Kenichi. His surprise was noticeable. He tried to explain that it was impossible, not because he disliked her, but because of decency. However, she looked at him with determined anger, and he realized that it was pointless to argue. They would have to share the same bed. The girl nodded firmly in response. Kenichi realized that the sudden sale and separation from his family had shaken Buttercup badly, leaving a deep wound and an acute need for warmth and care. Later he asked if she wanted to learn to read and write. The girl enthusiastically agreed. They decided to start classes after dinner. Kenichi prepared curry, which the girl ate with obvious pleasure, noting its flavor. He watched her with a smile, pleased with her happiness and progress, realizing that he could have a child about the same age. His intention was to teach her literacy and numeracy, so that she could become independent and work. Night fell, and the silent sky was covered with a twinkling blanket of countless stars. After the great reward was received, the entire team celebrated their victory, enjoying a well-deserved rest. However, rumors continued to spread in the city circles that one of the nobles had been stripped of his surname, which was a real sensation. The knight was promoted and given a small territory, making him lord of the land. The knight was promoted and given a small territory, making him lord of the land. Meanwhile, Kenichi could not shake off his anxiety as he pondered the implications of the strange nut he had eaten shortly before the battle. His life gradually returned to normal, and more often Mayor or Primura came to his house, filling it with warmth and peace. It had been a month since Kenichi and his team had defeated a gang of bandits and returned to the city. One day Anama stopped by his house, the first time someone from the city had visited him in his home in a long time. She admitted that it was usually a bit scary to come here, but what can you do? Suddenly Anama asked Kenichi a difficult question, if he could give her Buttercup. Kenichi didn't understand what exactly Anama was talking about, because Buttercup was not a toy and certainly not a pet. The girl had already reached the age of 12, the moment when they start working and make their own decisions about their fate. Buttercup had every right to choose where and with whom to live. Anama took one look at the girl and lowered herself beside her, calling her name affectionately. She assured her that she could teach Buttercup a trade, that they would have more fun together, and the girl would never feel lonely again. Anama offered to live together, promising her care and support. However, Buttercup firmly refused, stating her desire to stay with Kenichi. Anama silently took the refusal and quietly told the girl that if things got hard for her, she could always come to her for help. The girl nodded in agreement. Anama quietly left the house. Kenichi realized that this was a difficult moment for Anama and questioned how well she was feeling after this conversation. But Buttercup's decision was final, and Kenichi had no right to interfere. Buttercup remained by Kenichi's side, but rumors that the nobles were looking for him had already penetrated the city streets and markets. Many merchants, hiding their true feelings for the rich man, preferred to keep quiet, but it was clear that the secret would not remain secret for long. Everyone knew about the bulky truck and the excavator, and realized that it was impossible to keep everyone silent. Shortly before leaving, Kenichi stood in his cozy vegetable garden, admiring the brightly colored velvets. The time for packing was near. He carefully dismantled the fence, removed the flowers, rolled up the solar panels, switched the power system to a diesel generator, all of it stowed in his magic inventory, so that he would be ready to flee at a moment's notice. There was only one thing left to do: visit Maru, who welcomed him with joy and invited him to enter the warm house. Kenichi said that he wanted to pay back his debt for the equipment he had borrowed for the hike by paying with the loot. Moreau was surprised, as it was only fair that he should pay back the valuables. But Kenichi explained that it was only a loan, and as an honest man, he was obliged to keep his promise. Moreau recognized that Kenichi had saved them all, and at that moment Kenichi pulled out a neatly folded blueprint. Kenichi handed Moreau a piece of paper with a detailed drawing of a new bicycle, expressing his confidence that he would be able to build it. Moreau was amazed and slightly embarrassed by the gift, but Kenichi quickly reassured him, saying that it was fine and that it was not an unusual gift. Kenichi then inquired about the fate of the girls, who had recently been held captive by bandits. Moreau nodded in response, assuring him that they had already found jobs and were doing well, so there was no need to worry about them. At that moment, Primura approached Kenichi, noting that he now needed to think more about his own safety than the concerns of others. Kenichi asked if she was referring to the nobles, for he had heard of the rumors spreading through the city. He expressed that without him, they would have nothing to worry about. Primura was taken aback by that look and wondered if he was going to leave the city. Kenichi explained that he was only considering such an option for now. The girl suggested that he appear at least once for an audience at the palace and try to understand the position of the nobles. After all, the owner of these lands, Count Asclepius, is not so cruel. However, Kenichi explained that if they learned of his power as a mage and ordered his capture, no one could stop them. Primura recognized that he was right. Moreau and his daughter had been a great help to Kenichi, but he felt that saving Primura had covered all his debts, and it was time to leave this place. Kenichi soon met up with Buttercup and explained to her that he had decided to leave because it was dangerous to stay here. The nobles might try to kidnap him and force him to serve their interests. He asked what she was going to do and if she would go to Anama. But Buttercup firmly refused, stating that she wanted to stay with him. Kenichi warned the girl that they would have to spend the night in the open, but she only nodded, confirming the permanence of her decision. He realized it was impossible to change her mind. Realizing that he had only taught her a little bit of reading and writing, he thought Buttercup would be better off with Anama, but he respected her choice and wasn't going to interfere. With everything going on, Kenichi began to prepare for tomorrow's departure. All the furniture and dishes needed to be disassembled. Some things were to be thrown away and the rest put into inventory, just like the fence with the blooming velvets. Kenichi had purchased a used mountain bike for ease of transportation. The town preferred to ride bikes, but he was confident he could explain his unusual purchase to those around him and find a justification for this choice. A motorcycle with a two-stroke engine was not chosen at random. It was the kind of motor for which engine oil was available at Shangri-La, making maintenance much easier. However, he was much more concerned about the house and whether it would fit in the inventory. It was no bigger than a truck, which had already fit in there successfully. Kenichi decided to experiment and tried to move the house. In the next second, the house dissolved into thin air, actually appearing inside the inventory. The base disappeared along with it. Presumably, the inventory perceived it as an integral part of the house and included it in the transfer. Kenichi then handed the helmet to Buttercup, explaining that they would be traveling now, so she would definitely need to wear it. When they got on the bike, Kenichi carefully explained to Buttercup that she needed to put her feet on the special ledges on the sides and hold on tightly. The girl obediently did so. He warned her not to move while moving as it could be dangerous. Buttercup nodded again in response. It was only when Kenichi decided to move off that he suddenly felt something unusual behind him. He was approached by a forest cat, an old acquaintance whose appearance made Kenichi genuinely happy. He smiled and affectionately asked the cat to take care of itself, to which it purred in response. Saying goodbye to his pet, Kenichi focused on the road again and they set off. Heading west, towards the road that connected the cities, Kenichi decided to take his time, keeping a moderate speed of 10 to 20 kilometers per hour. If there was one thing he could regret, it was not saying goodbye to the Maru family and everyone who had helped him. But he realized that goodbyes would have been too hard, and he didn't want to drag them into his problems. It was the right thing to do. Suddenly, there was a familiar sound behind Kenichi's back. He turned around and saw a forest cat rapidly running after his motorcycle. Kenichi quietly explained to the pet that they were leaving this place and asked if he could really leave his home forest. The cat responded with a joyful meow. Kenichi then asked if the cat wanted to go with them and if he was sure of his decision. After receiving another affirmative meow, he agreed. He stopped his motorcycle and purchased a small container for his clothes. Carefully covering it with self-adhesive paper imitating tree bark so it wouldn't stand out from the surrounding nature, Kenichi attached the container to the back of the transport. He couldn't make the cat run after the motorcycle. It was too dangerous. Kenichi explained that if the cat wanted to accompany them on their journey, it would have to settle inside this box. Suddenly, the cat jumped up abruptly. It promptly jumped into the container, nestling itself snugly inside. Kenichi watched the cat in the container thoughtfully, wondering if the cat would fall off during the ride. But he quickly calmed down, realizing that the wild beast was agile enough that he wouldn't hurt himself even if he fell from a low height. And so they left the city, setting off on their journey. Images of the road flashed through his mind, covered in greenery and tall trees that created a picturesque tunnel. He wished they could find a cozy spot by the water, be it a lake or pond with a scenic view. Kenichi pondered if he could finally fulfill his dream of a quiet, measured life. There was already money, enough to take his time opening an inventory to sell things. He realized that if he behaved modestly and didn't stand out, no one would suspect anything unusual about him. His plan was to use the local currency and purchase food locally to blend in with his surroundings. There was an alternative way, mining in the mountains with the excavator and tools he had. The key was to make more money than he spent on fuel. Kenichi knew there was still a man from another world somewhere, but he didn't want to meet him. He had a lot of time to think and make decisions ahead of him. Suddenly, a familiar wagon appeared on the horizon. As he rode closer on his motorcycle, he recognized Fu, whom he hadn't seen in a while. Fu turned around and immediately remembered an old friend. Kenichi told Fu that he had managed to become a merchant, which made Fu genuinely happy. Fu asked where Kenichi was going, and when he saw his motorcycle, he immediately recognized it as the rumored popular bike. His gaze then stopped on Buttercup, and he asked who the girl was. Then he noticed an adorable forest cat nestled in the container in the back. Kenichi explained that it was his own bicycle, and Buttercup and the cat were his faithful companions, with whom he was going on a journey with no definite destination. Fu quietly envied such freedom and wished them a good journey. In return, Kenichi thanked his friend warmly and continued on his way. The sky was clear blue, with white clouds gently breaking through the leaves of the tall trees. At that moment, Kenichi realized that no matter how the road turned out, everything would definitely work out because they had the will to go forward, even without a clear plan. Thus began the journey of the uncle, the girl, and one forest beast, searching for their new home, a new beginning, and perhaps happiness. Kenichi bought a fishing kit and, stopping by a calm lake, went fishing with Buttercup. The girl looked into the clear water and noticed that there were many fish swimming in it, shimmering in the light with their beautiful scales. Kenichi watched one of them with interest and recognized it as a familiar fish from his past world, a rainbow trout. He carefully fished it out and put it in his inventory, where the familiar name immediately popped up. After catching a few specimens, He decided to take a little break and take his time, savoring the simple pleasures. This Hamada Kenichi, an ordinary uncle who suddenly found himself in another world, with a unique ability to use the Shangri-La site linking this world to the past, and with an inventory whose capacity seemed limitless. He needed money to survive and live a quiet life, so he made heavy use of trade and interaction with the locals, including anthropomorphs. However, life in the new world was not without its difficulties. His rescue of the daughter of an influential premier merchant made him famous, and now the nobles were looking for him. Forced to leave the city, Kenichi took with him Buttercup, an orphan freed from the clutches of bandits, and his faithful forest cat. The road seemed easier with these companions, and the search for a new home and beginning beckoned ahead. Soon a lunch of freshly caught rainbow trout was ready on the bank by the river. Buttercup exclaimed with delight as she smelled and tasted the fresh fish. Kenichi thought with a smile that this was it, the real calm and measured life, catching fish and enjoying meatball soup in the open air. The feeling even seemed a little magical. The girl, after tasting the food, excitedly declared that Kenichi's dishes were always delicious. Although she was only 12, she looked rather small for her age, but her appetite was good. When they finished their meal, Kenichi realized it was time to move on in search of a new place to live. He scribbled a simple map in the sand and showed it to Buttercup, explaining that they were about 100 kilometers from Dalia, by motorcycle mileage. People passing by told him that only 5 or 6 kilometers away was a small town called Estrantia. Kenichi realized that the hustle and bustle of the city wouldn't give them a measured life, and regretted that they had to carry their house so far away. He wanted to explore the surrounding area better. Suddenly an idea came to him. He decided to use a drone with a camera to survey the area from above. The girl looked at this modern device in amazement, not believing her eyes. Kenichi watched with interest to see if he could launch the drone and survey the nearby landscape. He pressed a button on the remote control, and the drone soared into the air. Buttercup, seeing this little marvel of technology, couldn't hold back a delighted exclamation, calling what was happening magic. Kenichi knew that the drone could rise about 100 meters, giving him a wide view of the surrounding area. From the height, he could see the river flowing smoothly into a lake with a small village next to it, and a castle towering nearby. It had to be Estrantia. Suddenly, a beautiful waterfall caught Kenichi's attention. He explained to Buttercup that they could get fresh water there, and they set off. Soon a majestic waterfall spread out before them, striking in its beauty and power. Kenichi stopped, amazed by the beauty of the view around him. This place seemed perfect for his second camp. This was where he had decided to set up his new shelter. He thought about digging a small vegetable garden closer to the noisy waterfall, and also thought it would be convenient to install a toilet for convenience. They had already left the land belonging to the nobles of Dalia, and it gave them a sense of security. Now there was no fear of anyone catching up with them. Kenichi bowed his head in prayer, asking God for help and protection in this new phase of life. He then pulled out his house from his inventory, and the next second it appeared in front of them, as if materializing out of thin air. Suddenly the silence was broken by a gentle cat sound. A forest cat approached them. Kenichi realized that the pet needed a name if it was going to continue the journey with them. Buttercup suggested calling him Vel. She explained that his fur was soft and velvety, and that name suited him perfectly. Kenichi greeted the cat warmly, calling him by his new name, though he wasn't sure if the beast understood human words. Kenichi realized that the next day he would have to install solar panels and plow the vegetable garden, using the backhoe again. However, there was still the unresolved problem of diesel fuel. They didn't sell it on Shangri-La. Now he used expensive kerosene, but he dreamed of finding a more affordable option. Memories of the past came flooding back. On TV, he had seen waste oil being refined into biodiesel. This gave him the idea to research the relevant materials. Immersed in reading, he was pensively browsing through the book when Buttercup looked at him interestedly and asked what he was doing. Kenichi explained to Buttercup that he was reading a book, and the girl excitedly shouted that she wanted to try it too. He explained to her, however, that the letters in the book were completely different from those used in their country, and so it would be difficult for her to read the text right away. But Buttercup insisted that she wanted to learn to read in his language, despite the difficulties. Kenichi decided to buy her a book with bright illustrations to make learning more interesting, and also drew a table of hiragana with transcription to make memorization easier. The girl settled down on the bed and immersed herself in learning new symbols and sounds, quickly switching to the new alphabet. Soon Buttercup was so engrossed in her studies that she was completely immersed in the new world of letters. Meanwhile, Kenichi stood outside, busy setting up his new home. Kenichi had installed a toilet, bathtub, and solar panels, basically recreating almost everything from his former home, except for the vegetable garden, which was still untouched. Suddenly, an unexpected sound came from behind him. Before he could turn around, Mare swiftly attacked him and knocked him to the ground. Kenichi recognized her immediately and noted with some irony that he almost shot her with his crossbow if he hadn't reacted in time. Mare sharply stated that it wasn't fair to walk away from them so suddenly. She told how hard it was to track them just by the scent of the forest cat and his cart. Kenichi was amazed that she was able to find them based on only such a thin trail, and realized that there was no escaping the anthropomorphs. Mare was adamant that the victim would never leave her side. Kenichi admitted that he realized she had been following him all along, but he wanted to know her plans. Mare replied without hesitation that she intended to live with him. Kenichi agreed, but warned her that she would have to get her own food and that he would send her to town for shopping. Mare accepted this without objection. She was an excellent hunter with quick feet and a good carcass cutter, and she was a reliable and faithful companion. Kenichi entered the house and informed Buttercup of Mare's arrival. When she saw that Buttercup was living with him, she was overjoyed and said she was staying here too. Kenichi noticed that a warm sisterly relationship had already developed between them. Mare looked carefully at the book that Buttercup was reading and noticed that the illustrations were very beautiful. Although she couldn't read herself, the pictures were so clear that even she found it easy to follow the story. Kenichi thought about it and realized that there were many people like Mare who couldn't read, so books with colorful illustrations would be in demand. He decided that if he bought a printer on Shangri-La, he would be able to print such books himself. Even thin picture books were valued in this world, so this would do. However, stories from his past world were unlikely to resonate here. Kenichi then asked the girls if they knew any local tales. Buttercup excitedly explained that she knew one tale, about a wood elf princess. She said that the princess fell in love with a human prince, but both elves and humans were against their union. The princess was almost killed, but thanks to her magical powers she was able to escape with her lover, and they lived quietly deep in the forest for the rest of their lives. Kenichi realized that this mermaid-like story would also be close to the people here. Encouraged, he decided to create a book of 12 pages using screen printing and sell it for about 5,000 yen. From then on, Kenichi tended a vegetable garden, studied biodiesel, and in his spare time drew illustrations and thought of ways to print the book. Soon he bought a rotator, a printing device, and decided to try printing the first pages. Mare was amazed to learn that he knew how to make books. Kenichi explained that printing works like this: a drawing is drawn on special paper, then set it in the rotator, and printing begins. He showed the girls a mock-up of the cover and asked their opinion. Both were delighted. Buttercup took the drawing in her hands and exclaimed that it was cool, and Mare declared that she wanted a book like that too. Kenichi understood their desire. Now all that was left was to collect all the printed sheets, 12 in all. For this purpose, he had purchased a thermal glue machine. He had to carefully insert the pages into the machine and glue them together to make a real book. Soon Kenichi had his first printed book. When Buttercup saw it, she immediately grabbed it and flipped through it with delight. Mare, who was standing next to her, also scrutinized the pages and admired the illustrations. As Kenichi had planned, there were 12 copies in all. He handed one book to Mare, who approached Buttercup and asked what it said. Buttercup proudly read that the book was about a distant elven princess who lived deep in the forest. Mare praised her for her ability to read. It was quite an accomplishment for her. Kenichi went outside. He was so engrossed in the printing process that the sun was already high above the horizon. He opened the book, read a few pages, and decided it would be a good idea to collect the tales of this world. The weather was beautiful, and the beds needed attention. Suddenly, near the shore of the lake, he noticed a boat with people approaching. He didn't realize who these people were or what their intentions were. Therefore, he instantly put out his crossbow, trying to assess the situation and show that he would not allow the uninvited guests to approach without explanation. The men on the boat immediately began begging for mercy, explaining that they lived in a neighboring village, and pointed their hand towards the shore to confirm their words. In the boat were 2 men with rough faces and an anthropomorph with kind eyes. Kenichi examined them carefully, remembering what he had heard about the fisherman. He said he was a trader and had a right to live in these places. The men admitted that they thought he was a bandit at first and decided to check him out to keep their village safe. At that moment, a forest cat approached Kenichi, purring softly and rubbing against his legs. One of the men became interested in the cat, asking why he was with Kenichi. The man took the animal in his arms and explained that the cat, a member of his family and loyal companion. The anthropomorph nodded respectfully, noting that wild forest cats don't attach themselves to humans without reason, and this spoke to Kenichi's good intentions. The man, hearing the anthropomorph's words, realized that he was telling the truth and respectfully decided to introduce himself. He said that his name was Curtin, that he lived in the small village of Ixora nearby, and that he had previously worked as a civil servant in Astration, a large city that Kenichi knew only from stories. Kenichi himself, in turn, also gave his name, revealing a piece of his history to his new acquaintance. After a long conversation and mutual exchange of information, Curtin and his companions left the house, leaving Kenichi and his company alone with their thoughts. Returning, Kenichi found Buttercup at dinner and told her of the neighbor's visit. The girl listened attentively, asking questions and showing genuine interest. He explained that they were people from a neighboring village who didn't want a dangerous stranger in their neighborhood, so they had come to check out who he was. Kenichi showed the guest his wares, a blanket and a book, which they eagerly purchased. Meanwhile, Mare, watching all of this, felt annoyed and incomprehensible as to how people could dare to come here, especially since they had a live forest cat with them, a luxurious and rare pet for most commoners. Despite her displeasure, Kenichi was benevolent and asked if the girls would like another portion of his favorite curry. They happily replied in agreement, happily shouting out how much they loved the dish. Kenichi was surprised to see such love from the children for their food, though he hadn't expected such an enthusiastic response. Later, he approached Mare with a question about what had changed in Dalia since he had left the city. Mare thought for a moment, gathering her memories. Then, she reported that a knight from the Nosebol family had proposed to the daughter of a Maru merchant. Kenichi immediately remembered that he was the one who had helped defeat the bandits, and realized that these families would now unite into one. This news filled him with joy, for it was rumored that the marriage was successful and strong. Kenichi regretted not being able to attend the ceremony, but he realized it was impossible. One day, while researching plants, Kenichi carefully placed a rare blue eye in his inventory, thinking to test its value in the city's guild. At the most unexpected moment, Meyer jumped on Kenichi's back like a light shadow, reminding him of the real business at hand. He reminded with a slight smile that his task was to gather herbs. However, Meyer pointed out the absence of Buttercup nearby. This made Kenichi hesitate for a moment, not immediately realizing exactly what she meant. In the back of his mind, he kept coming back to the same question over and over again, whether this life, this measured, quiet life, was really the life he longed for. Kenichi left Dalia and settled down on the riverbank, intent on continuing to move toward his goal, living a quiet and measured life. One hot day, when the air was hot to the touch, he put on his protective suit, which he found heavy and stuffy, and hurried to the river. Dropping the suit, he dove into the cool waters, feeling instant relief. The heat that languished him in the barn was reminiscent of a sauna. Kenichi carefully assembled the shed he had purchased through the Shangri-La website, and immediately began experimenting with making biodiesel. All the ingredients needed for this were available on the same website, and he scrutinized the instructions and techniques to do it right. If everything worked out, he would be able to use vegetable oil instead of regular diesel. The savings would be enormous, almost 10 times. This would mean he would be able to run an excavator and other machinery, making the job much easier and expanding the farm's capabilities. Working with some chemicals was dangerous, many of them highly toxic, and even the slightest mistake could lead to poisoning or explosion. But Kenichi was determined and cautious. When it came time for a test run, the engine started, albeit with thick white smoke that seemed excessive, but the functioning was stable. This success inspired him to scale up production. For several days, he worked almost without respite, using 50 liters of canola oil per 2 approaches, producing about 90 liters of biodiesel. However, due to his busyness with fuel production, he had almost stopped paying attention to Buttercup, and the girl was visibly discouraged and resentful of him. Realizing this, Kenichi tried to make amends by offering to buy her a new book. She was interested in the offer and became excited about the idea. Buttercup then expressed a desire to visit the city of Astratea, which was nearby, and Mary, hearing about it, wanted to join as well. Kenichi had accumulated a lot of booty, animal carcasses, in his inventory, and together they decided to register with the local adventurers guild so they could have official permission to trade and run errands. Along the way, Kenichi asked Mary if she had ever been to Astratea, to which she replied that she had visited the city several times. Soon they came to the massive eastern gate of the city, which promised a quick encounter with a new place. Once inside, Kenichi noticed the many people bustling about the streets. The city was smaller than Dalia, but even here bicycles were widely used, giving the cityscape a familiar look. Kenichi offered to register for the Adventurers Guild first, much to the delight of Buttercup, who immediately expressed her desire to go with them. Mare, not wanting to lag behind, also expressed interest in the event. Upon entering the guild, Kenichi noticed that the room was slightly smaller than in Dalia, but the spirit and atmosphere was the same, the constant movement of people, like a job site that was always overflowing with active adventurers. They were greeted by a young and very pretty girl behind the counter. It made Kenichi wonder if the girls behind the counter looked so attractive everywhere else in the guilds. Kenichi signaled his desire to register, after which the girl asked to wait a bit and walked out. After a few seconds, the girl came back in, calling Kenichi by name and asking if he was the man who defeated the Shaga bandits. Kenichi asked her to keep her voice down for fear of attracting unnecessary attention. The girl apologized, explaining her excitement, and Kenichi smiled and forgave her, noting that she had a pretty face. Checking in took a little while, and soon the process was complete. He paid 2 silver coins for the two of them, approximately 100,000 yen. After the registration, he asked if the guild had a plant encyclopedia. The girl replied that it was available, cost 2 small silver coins, and was for beginner herb collectors. She handed him a small volume and added that the guild also accepted healing plants. Kenichi took the book, turned the pages, and immediately noted that one herb, with black and red round berries, was not described in the book. The girl explained that these red fruits were used as a seasoning, and fresh stalks were paid for with 1 small silver coin per branch. Kenichi readily agreed to sell it to her. One stem was worth about 5,000 yen to 10,000. Collecting herbs proved to be quite lucrative, and Kenichi sold almost everything he had. The animals, too, were either bought whole or butchered at once. In the evening, he picked up the already cooked meat. Together with Buttercup and Mare, they went to the market to eat and taste the local specialties. Buttercup complained that she could barely taste anything. The soup was bland with no broth, and the bread was hard and dry. Kenichi tried the food himself and wasn't satisfied either. He looked in his inventory and pulled out a broth of dried tuna and some black pepper, rare spices here. By adding them to the food, he was able to improve the flavor a bit. Despite this slight improvement, Mare and Buttercup were satisfied, gratitude shining in their faces, and the atmosphere at the table became warmer. After lunch, when all the major shopping was done, Kenichi had plenty of free time. He glanced around the streets of the city, wondering how to spend the rest of the day in an interesting and useful way. His attention was drawn to a small hardware store that had a light but enticing aroma, as if it held some real treasures. Deciding it was worth a look inside, he invited the girls along. Inside the store, they were greeted by a woman wrapped in a dark hood, who took a close look at the strangers and admitted that she hadn't seen them here before. Kenichi explained that he was from Dalia, the city where they had lived until recently. The woman immediately asked if he knew Grandpa Mag, which he confirmed. She was surprised to hear that she had recently received a letter from him informing her of his supposedly brilliant discovery. At first, she thought it was the ravings of a madman. Kenichi realized that he himself had not done the best thing by leaving without a goodbye or explanation. The woman carefully asked if they would like to purchase anything from the assortment on display. Kenichi hesitated, studying the display cases and items, and suddenly his gaze was caught by a strange device. He turned to the woman and asked her what it was for. She smiled and, noticing his curiosity, asked if he was interested in such unusual things. Since Kenichi didn't understand much, she decided to demonstrate how the device worked in practice. She began gently pouring liquids into the device. The center funnel was filled with clear water, and the wide funnel with wine. Kenichi smelled the subtle, familiar aroma of wine. The thick wine essence dripped from one side, while clear water flowed out from the other. Suddenly he realized that this machine separated liquids into their component parts, what poured into the wide funnel separating into different parts. The woman praised his cleverness, explaining that it was the ingredient poured into the middle funnel that came out the left side of the device. Kenichi realized that pouring water in there would separate all the water from the wine. The woman confirmed this and told him that similar devices were used by alchemists. Although the device was complex and incomprehensible, Kenichi wondered if it was some sort of magical tool that broke the usual laws of nature. It suddenly struck him that such a device could be used to safely make biodiesel, the fuel he planned to use for his cars. Inspired by the idea, he stated that he was ready to buy the machine. The woman clarified if he was sure of the decision, but instead of answering, Kenichi wondered if she had anything else curious. In response, the woman tossed a book onto the table. The woman explained in detail that the book in front of them contained magical spells. This frankly dumbfounded Kenichi. It seemed he was encountering something from the world of fantasy and legends. He wondered if by studying this book, he could learn to master magic. The woman coldly pointed out that without innate magical abilities, reading it would be of no use, and stated the price, 10 gold coins, which was about 2 million yen. However, after reading, the book could be sold for a good amount of money. Kenichi thought for a moment. In a world where magic really existed, he couldn't ignore this power. The realization came that studying magic might become a necessity. He stated firmly that he was buying the book. The woman gratefully accepted payment and explained that such books required mandatory registration, so he would not be able to pick it up until a week later. Then Kenichi turned his attention to the medicine stacked neatly on the table. The woman noticed with a slight smile that he seemed inclined to indulge as well, and asked if he wanted to keep her company. Kenichi grinned, realizing it was a joke. They walked out of the store, where they had already had time to explore the many local goods. They had explored the town quite thoroughly, spending their time waiting to register with the guild. Everyone was tired and longing to go home, but Buttercup was glowing with joy. It was the first time she had been in a real city in a long time. Kenichi decided they should take a break somewhere. Suddenly his gaze fell on a dark alleyway. Standing there was a familiar guy, the curtain he had seen recently. He was surrounded by 3 thugs, a classic bunch, thin, fat, and stunted. Behind curtain stood a little girl, probably his daughter. The situation looked threatening. Kenichi was confused, not knowing what to do in this situation. Buttercup grabbed his hand and silently asked for help. Her gaze was pleading and hopeful, and Kenichi couldn't resist such sincerity. He realized that there was no other way out. He turned to Mare and gave her the responsibility, telling her that he relied on her if anything went wrong. Mare accepted the task with confidence, ready to protect her friends. Realizing that he couldn't show his face lest he become an easy target, Kenichi hurried to find a mask on Shangri-La. His eyes sparkled when he saw the mask. It was like a return to the forgotten school dreams and images he had always wanted to try on. Despite the 7,500 yen price tag, the man decided that the moment had come when he couldn't do without it anymore. Buttercup looked at him in surprise as he put on the plague doctor mask and quietly explained that the bullies shouldn't see her, so she should hide. Though the girl didn't show much admiration for his stylish image, it didn't matter to Kenichi. Walking out towards the bullies, he ordered everyone to stop without a shadow of a doubt. His voice was firm and left no doubt. He condemned them for attacking innocent people and a child. The bullies responded defiantly, taunting and threatening to retaliate. Then Kenichi used explosive magic, firecrackers that flared brightly and went off in all directions, causing sheer chaos. The bullies were gripped with panic and terror. He teased them, warning them that next time the explosions could happen inside them. Panicked, the hooligans started screaming and running away. They attracted the attention of passers-by, who peered puzzledly into the alley. Taking off his mask, Kenichi called out to Curtain to run, realizing that he had overdone the effect a bit. Curtain and his daughter stood motionless, dumbfounded, as if petrified. Soon they came to a busy marketplace. Curtain, smiling, admitted that he didn't recognize Kenichi in the mask. The latter noted with relief that everyone was unharmed. Curtain expressed his gratitude for the rescue. The girl turned to her father and asked who the man was, and was told that he was the one who had created the picture book. She bowed to Kenichi and thanked him for the gift, and then looked curiously at Buttercup, after which they stepped aside. Curtin told her that he had long suspected something unusual about Kenichi, but had not expected him to possess magic. Kenichi asked to keep that secret, and Curtin nodded in agreement. Wondering who had attacked Curtin and his daughter, Kenichi listened to the story of an old feud. The bandits had been taking revenge on Curtin ever since he, as a government employee, had repeatedly apprehended them. They had attacked him in the city whenever they met him, not even sparing the girl. Kenichi pointed out the danger of such a life and suggested that he consider moving elsewhere. Curtin admitted that he had long dreamed of doing so, but did not know where to go. Then Kenichi told him that they were gathering men near Dalia for the domain of Baron No Spoke, with whom he was familiar, and offered to help with a recommendation. Given Curtin's experience, he would surely get a good job. Curtin thanked, but said he needed time to think. Kenichi realized that the decision to leave his homeland was not an easy one, and moving to a new world would not be easy. Glancing at the girls, he saw how they had become friends. Buttercup proudly told him that she had helped make a book, and Curtin's daughter excitedly asked if she could help make a new book too. Buttercup ran up to Kenichi, excitedly telling him that Mari was dreaming of a new book and wanted to help create it herself. Kenichi didn't hesitate to agree, assuring her that in that case, they would definitely make it together. Excited, Buttercup cheered loudly and loudly announced to Mari that Kenichi had promised to make a new book. At that moment, Kurtwan approached Kenichi and asked if he was really the one who had created the book. Kenichi nodded in response, explaining that he sometimes drew just for himself, not expecting any fame. Then his thoughts turned back to Buttercup. He realized that she had no peers with whom she could be friends and share her joys. Perhaps that was why Marie had been her first real friend, who had given her a sense of closeness and support.